Well, hello there, and welcome to Rewind, a show where we look back at a thing that we're familiar with and we talk about it at length. We are back for our annual May the 4th Star Wars special, and we are discussing the entire prequel trilogy. But before that, we have a couple initial thoughts. So we want to thank our friend Quincy Neal, who made a piece of artwork for us for this video that you will see many times throughout it, and we're going to link to her Instagram and her portfolio below, but her Instagram is
Q Production Design.
Yeah, so we're just going to start with our overall thoughts on the trilogy, and then we'll go through film by film for more in-depth discussion. So, Niles, why don't you kick us off with some general thoughts about the prequel trilogy?
Rewatching these movies, it definitely made me realize how greatly nostalgia and the novelty of childhood influenced my perception and opinions of these movies, because I'm mid to late 20s at this point.
You're late 20s. You're not
yes.
Mid to late 20s. Stop that.
Come on. I'm trying here to retain some of my youth. But, we grew up with these movies. 1999 to 2005 was when these were released. So I think childhood in general influenced my perception of these. Objectively speaking, they're not great movies, in my opinion. I don't think that prequels are very good. They're confusing, they're overwhelming. I think that they're poorly written, and just poorly directed in general. I think George kind of dropped the ball.
They're very flatly directed.
I think that's a good way to put it. But because these came out during my childhood, I think that has kind of maintained my positive perception of them overall. I like a lot of parts of these movies, but as a whole, I know that they're not great. They have this good campy vibe to them today, but yeah, it's just really hard to ignore some of these glaring flaws in the movie.
Yeah.
And when the last time I watched episode 1 or 2, I think I was probably 11 or maybe less than that.
Okay, so I've seen them more recently than you have.
Yeah. So rewatching these today, it was I had a better understanding of all the bureaucratic details, all the logistics and everything like that. And so I appreciated that stuff. But as a child, it's what the hell are they talking about with trade routes?
Yeah, and we'll get more into that specifically in the Phantom Menace.
I'll also say, initially that you and I were both fans of Red Letter Media.
We are, yes.
And so we watched the Plinkett reviews many times at these points, and not as much recently.
Yeah, well, I watched them first in high school. It was, funnily enough, it was the Plinkett prequel reviews and me being an extra in a movie that got me interested in film beyond just casually watching movies. I actually disagree with quite a lot of what's in the Plinkett reviews at this point in time, yes. But learning about blocking and shot composition and tone, a lot of my first exposure to that came from those fucking videos, which are very dated now. A lot of their humor did not age gracefully, but that's what the internet and YouTube culture was at that time.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I feel that they just, so much of that, they've already talked ad nauseum about all the wrong things about these movies, so I'm going to try not to hone in on those same things and repeat the stuff they pointed out. Yeah, I don't want to try and one-up them on that.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, I would say too, we are going to be somewhat negative and critique these movies, but we're not trying to bring them down a peg or make jokes at the movie's expense. If you want to see that, the Plinkett reviews are a great example of that. Marcus, Cosmonaut Variety Hours video on the prequels also does that. So if you want a negative thrashing of the prequels, you can go to those videos instead. We have, I think, some different thoughts than that. But like you, having grown up with these films, I have nostalgia for them as well, even though I don't fully like any of them today. There are little details and more than I remembered that I do like about each film, and I really want to talk about those. I will say, too, as a child, I fucking loved these. Oh, yes. They were so cool, and I think that's worth noting because George loves to say that these are movies for 12-year-olds. Revenge of the Sith came out in 2005. I was 11. I was the market for these movies, but I think it is interesting that while I loved them as a kid, my love for them did not stay as strong as I got older, and that is not the case for the originals and even most of the Disney era, I would say I'm pretty positive on. I'll also say that, and this is something, I don't really have a point with this, but I just think it's interesting, and you would fall into this as well, but because of our ages and the years these movies came out, I don't have an image of Star Wars from before this trilogy began. I watched the originals, I think technically before Phantom Menace came out, but I actually think it's somewhat interesting that based on your generation, you will have a different perception of what Star Wars is, a different relationship to it. So people For people our age and younger, things like Coruscant, Naboo, the prequel era Jedi, and this narrative in general have just always been a part of Star Wars. They weren't additions to it.
Yeah.
Even though we consciously understand that they came out years after the originals, they've just always been there, and that's not the case for people older than us. And similarly, people much younger than us will have that same relationship to the Clone Wars animated series and the sequels and a lot of the other Disney stuff, which to us feels like additions to an existing franchise. And I think that is an interesting element of this.
Yeah, I agree.
And another note, before I give my thoughts overall on the movies here, is the way George and the cast, especially Ahmed Best and Jake Lloyd, were treated by the fans as these movies came out was completely beyond the pale and wholly unacceptable. Lloyd was a literal child, and Ahmed Best was almost driven to suicide because of hatred received from Star Wars fans. And this is behavior that has persisted into the sequel era, with the harassment of Daisy Ridley, John Boyega, Kelly Marie Tran, Kathleen Kennedy, J.J. Abrams, and Rian Johnson. This fan base has, for decades, demonstrated an entitlement and harassment problem, and it is both gross and embarrassing. I am embarrassed to say I am a Star Wars fan sometimes because of this shit. It's so nasty. But yeah, onto the trilogy itself. It is fantastic in concept, but it is lacking in execution. There's quite a lot I like, but I think the writing doesn't necessarily deliver on the promise of its premise, which I'll get to in a moment. But yeah, back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you're right there about, the hate for Ahmed Best and Jake Lloyd. Undeserved, and I think it represents persistent toxicity within the Star Wars culture. But you're right, it is like a sense of entitlement too. Like so many like Star Wars fans today are like middle-aged men.
Well, yeah, and the whole like George Lucas raped my childhood, that was a song that people wrote and performed. Like, that's embarrassing. Shame on you for saying shit like that. Like, that's not cool.
I think, I agree that George, he had a great concept here with the prequels, like just the concept of just like what was before the Empire.
Yes.
Going back to that is a great idea. And I think the Galactic Republic, like the Separatists, they are neat in concept for sure. And just like the visuals and aesthetics of the prequels are beautiful. But I think that George really needed less creative control here on these three movies. Like I've already kind of mentioned, I feel like that these messages are confusing, they're messy, and they're boring at times, especially the first one. When you're a kid, it's really hard to pay attention when these people are talking about these high-level political concepts.
Defer your motion to allow a commission to explore the validity of your accusations.
It's a great line, I guess.
Well, it
rolls off the tongue really well.
Yeah, but you're right. It's like that's not a line that like hits a 12-year-old and they go like, I'm really having fun here.
I totally understand everything the Chancellor said. So I think for me, it ultimately comes down to a few things. Someone needed to do with George, be another voice in the room to like scale things back and edit things, because I think there needs to be more brevity in the narrative here. I feel like there's a lot of scenes, lots of shots, lots of snippets of dialogue that I noticed on this rewatch of all three of them that I feel like could have been either just synthesized or just cut. Also visual storytelling. I think we're kind of spoiled by some movies today just being exceptional in their visual storytelling. Like Dune Part 2 just came out, and like that movie is just phenomenal.
It is.
It can scope and just scale, and just the way that they communicate information is exceptional in that movie, and a lot of it is visually communicated. It's visual storytelling. And then I feel like in a lot of the prequels, a lot of things are just verbally communicated to us rather than shown. I also think the cinematography at some parts, there are some really stunning visuals, some really stunning shots and sequences, like when Anakin and Padme are on Naboo in episode 2, you got that symmetrical shot of him like meditating, standing.
Exactly, after his nightmare,
That one's beautiful. Like, I love that part. Or like the overhead shot of the 501st walking into the Jedi Temple. That is an excellent shot. But then you got so many boring shots of characters just shot over the shoulder,
Well, it's the red letter media thing. It's like so many dialogues are shot, reverse shot, and at the same point in the scene, a character stands up and walks over to a window. I do agree with the criticism that it seems like a lot of the dialogue scenes were shot for efficiency rather than creative purpose for whatever reason, because it's like we're just stealing from their critique, but it's like whenever something important happens, they're sitting on a couch, they're sitting at a table, they're sitting in a chair. There is no intentionality in where these scenes are set and where characters are placed in the frame in a lot of them, and that is disappointing. There's it's a Nerdwriter video, I think, from ages ago about Hitchcock's Vertigo. It's an early scene in the movie, and I won't spoil the meaning behind it, but it's like if you know the plot of the movie on rewatch, you can see this like push and pull of power between the two characters in the scene just by where they are in the frame in relation to each other on the set. And it's so well done, and that isn't something that we get a lot of in these movies.
Yeah, unfortunately. I think it comes down to the director in a lot of ways, like how George Lucas directs people.
I do agree that George probably had too much control in the sense that in the early days he had a lot of people around who would question him. But I've heard people say that like people on set were intimidated by George, or that he's really controlling and not collaborative. And I watched the behind the scenes documentary around the Phantom Menace, and that's not the sense that I got at all. He seemed very approachable and really collaborative. And other people suggested ideas and stuff all the time. I think what probably happened was people may have felt a little bit intimidated, not by anything George did, but just because he's the guy who made Star Wars.
Yeah.
And people told George that a lot of his ideas were dumb back then in the 70s, and the result was Star Wars. I can see a lot of it being like, well, this seemed dumb in the 70s and it worked out really well, so maybe we're on to something here. If something's not quite clicking at this early point in production, it's all going to come together, like it all came together last time. Yeah, and did you have anything else you want to say before I move on to the...
Oh, I mean, I think I was just going to say that there's a lot of things that I think could have been fixed in these movies, could have been improved upon, and I don't want to just nitpick and focus on the negatives, because there are some great pockets of excellent, cool things here. Like, I love the world building and just the overall expansion the Star Wars universe that the prequels provides. Like, I think it's just really cool to see all these new planets, all these kind of new species, these new factions being brought into play here.
Right.
So I like that part of it, and I appreciate that the prequels, I think that they approached the concept of the Jedi in more of a critical light. You know, it is more focused on the hubris of the Jedi and, you know, their own arrogance. And that's absolutely something that they didn't talk about in the original trilogy.
No.
That's not what it was about. I love it. I love that they focus on the hubris here.
And that points to like a difference in where we are coming at this from, like when Red Letter Media made their review, like 10 plus years ago now. I think as our generation has gotten older, the fan base collectively has started to realize, like, oh, the Jedi are meant to kind of suck.
Yes.
This trilogy is a critique of them, and in like the Plinkett reviews, remember, they're like, why are the Jedi all this like weird cult people? And it's like, well, that's the point. And this goes back to what I mentioned earlier about it failing to deliver on the promise of its premise, because I think the thesis of this trilogy ultimately is a combination of liberal complacency and religious dogma leads to the fall of democracy and the rise of fascism, right? And as someone who is living in the today times in the United States...
Imagine what we can do next. 4 more years. 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 Are you ready?
They're ruining our country, and it's true. They're destroying the blood of our country. That's what they're doing. They're destroying our country. They don't like it when I said that, and I never read Mein Kampf. They said, oh, Hitler said that in a much different way.
That is something that feels especially relevant, as our liberal institutions are very complacent and allowing the rise of fascism to happen before our very eyes. But the trilogy is definitely drawing a parallel between Palpatine's rise to power and Hitler's rise to power in Nazi Germany. And in episodes 2 and 3 specifically, it's using that parallel as a critique of the post-9/11 Bush administration. Anakin even says, if you are not with me, then you're my enemy, which is taken directly from George W. Bush.
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us, or you are with the terrorists.
So this is how liberty dies, with thunderous applause.
This is not the first time that George has compared the United States to Nazi Germany. He did it in the original trilogy too, so this is a consistent political thing for him. I think like this trilogy's idea that evil like this can only achieve this absolute power through otherwise good people giving it to them willingly, or just doing nothing and like not paying proper attention as crises are manufactured to push more power upwards. I think that's all really, really interesting. But where this trilogy fails is with its characters. The main things emotionally for this trilogy to land, for it to work, were I needed to believe Anakin and Obi-Wan were friends and feel devastated at the dissolution of that friendship. I don't. I need to believe that Anakin and Padme were in love, and I need to feel great sadness that this relationship does not work out. I don't. And that is due to, a lot of it is the dialogue and also the way the relationships are spaced out in the movies, which we'll talk more specifically later on. But I want to close out this overall section with a quote from Roger Ebert's Revenge of the Sith review that illustrates just more how we should be looking at Star Wars. And the quote is, "And why, for that matter, does a deep space cruiser need an observation tower when every porthole opens to the universe? But never mind." Roger Ebert. And with that, it is time for us to go back to...
The countdown is on as Star Wars mania sweeps the nation.
All right, get out your lightsabers.
You just may have noticed that Star Wars, the latest episode, opens nationally at midnight tonight.
The new Star Wars movie will be released, taking you back to the beginning of the saga.
Anakin Skywalker, the young Darth Vader, Obi-Wan Kenobi, all the spaceships and special effects.
This is fucking awesome.
Star Wars Episode 1 follows Jedi Knights Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi as they are tasked with going to the planet of Naboo to resolve a trade dispute that is currently seeing the Trade Federation blockade the peaceful, lush planet. Along their adventures, they come across a young boy, Anakin Skywalker, and things ensue, and they travel across the galaxy and go to war. This one is interesting to me because it is my least favorite of the trilogy to watch, but I think in terms of filmmaking craft, it is far and away the best of the three. There are so many incredible sets, miniatures, costumes, and just well-blended VFX, and they like literally invented the technology to make some of the visual effects that happen in this movie. Like, it was impossible to do before the Phantom Menace, and they made the ways to do it.
Technically, there are quite a number of things that have never been attempted before. Things that were just not possible, still aren't possible, we're still working on.
Which is pretty incredible. However, the narrative is very strange and needlessly convoluted. What are some of your thoughts on the Phantom Menace?
We're starting off with the worst one in the bunch, man. I think Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, is a baffling nightmare in so many ways. Like, as a kid, I remember this being the most boring Star Wars movie. I was so uninterested in so much of it. This is one of those movies where, in the kind of the intro, I was talking about synthesizing brevity, making sure the narrative's clear and succinct. This is the movie that's not that. It's so confusing. So, like, first off, what the hell is the trade dispute about? I'm so unclear about this. What are they trading? What are the things that they're talking about? Is this a tariff disagreement over,
what is the Trade Federation?
Yeah, what does the Trade Federation do, and what are they trading? Yeah, is it spice? Like, I need to know here. And, like, why did Viceroy Gunray trust Lord Sidious's plan? It is maddeningly confusing when I was watching it this time. I'm just like, he's just going along with it. And like,
which seems to be his MO throughout the trilogy. He's just along for the ride.
Yeah, like, I understand Lord Sidious's plan, but like, the intentions of our antagonists are so unclear and messy here. It feels like every 5 minutes, the Sidious is like giving the Trade Federation guys new orders or new instructions, like with zero considerations of the consequences. He's just like, oh, there's Jedi, kill them.
Kill them immediately.
Okay, let's invade Naboo, do it, now, do it.
Neither of us, I think, would normally harp on something like this. Like, this is potentially a nitpick. But the problem is, it should be discussed a little bit within the film because this conflict is the whole movie. Where does the Trade Federation stand on these taxes? Are they pro the tax or anti the tax? I don't know. What do they want? And how are they hoping to get it by blockading Naboo? Is the dispute with the Naboo? And again, not normally something we would harp on, but like these are the main antagonists and we don't know what they want. Having some understanding of their intention, I think, is kind of important here.
It would definitely help. It would make things a lot clearer, and like especially when they go to Coruscant, you know, in the middle of the movie, and they're pleading with the Senate to get like some support. It's like it is still unclear even there about like why is the Trade Federation even there, especially since the Trade Federation is part of the Senate and they object. So yeah, just more context would have been so helpful.
Exactly. And like you said, I understand Sidious's plan. He wants to manufacture a crisis so that he has an excuse to gain more power. That is kind of his thing through the whole trilogy. I think that element of it works just fine. But then, given that, it's like, why does he want the treaty signed? What does making the invasion legal do for Palpatine's plans? How does it help the Trade Federation? What is going on?
Another thing that's confusing to me too is the decoy thing. I get it. Security, sure, makes sense. But it's so important for the Naboo, for the Queen to have a decoy. Yeah. And then logistically, I'm like, well, why is this so important if the real Queen is right there all the time in the room with them, and they can just kill all of them?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's for like a sniper attack or something, right? Like, and I understand the decoy thing when she's the Queen. When she's a senator, it's like, what? Okay, but
yes, in episode 2 it makes less sense.
Yeah, but also the thing that, again, from like either Cosmonauts review or Plinkett, the part where the decoy Queen tells the real Queen, Padme, to leave the throne room and go clean the droid. Like, no.
Why? Are you getting back at her for some reason?
Yeah.
And then it's like another logistical thing, and I know we're harping on some of these things, but like, if the decoy had signed the treaty, would that make it invalid because she's not the Queen?
I don't know.
The answer, doesn't matter.
It doesn't really matter.
It's just a convoluted plot element, the decoy, to have Padme introduced to Anakin and involved in the story. And yeah, like I know that we've kind of talked about it on some of our other episodes before too, but yeah, I don't really believe that Palpatine had a grand master plan and knew everything, how it would work, because there's so many factors here. He manipulated the Trade Federation into invading Naboo so he could initiate a vote of no confidence in the Senate and become the Chancellor. And at the same time, he knew they'd stop by Tatooine to pick up Anakin?
Yeah.
What?
So I totally agree with you. This film and the trilogy in general work much better if you assume that Palpatine is just an opportunist taking advantage of, like, you know, opportunities as they present themselves, because if he has a master plan, it's dumb and makes no sense. It's also just kind of cooler for his character if he is just kind of winging it, like improvising and sort of taking his wins where he can because he's playing the long game, right? That works a lot better in the trilogy because, and then we're going to talk about Anakin's birth in a second, but like, I like the idea that Palpatine did not anticipate an Anakin entering the picture, and he just, this kid fell into his lap, and then once he's there, he's like, oh, I can prime this kid.
And you, young Skywalker, we will watch your career with great interest.
But yeah, carry on to Anakin's virginal birth.
Yes.
Want to talk about this?
Yes, I think we do. We need to, because George, it's a little on the nose.
Space Jesus.
Yeah, let's throw everything that we can in there about, you know, just drawing a parallel between the Messiah and Anakin. Yeah. It's a little on the nose, and it's not as implied in this movie. It's kind of more implied in the next subsequent films that Palpatine manipulated the midichlorians to create Anakin. Right. It's never really confirmed.
The opera scene in episode 3 is like sperm and an egg. They're looking at a big egg and sperm thing happening.
And Palpatine's literally talking about the creation of life and being able to save people from death. Yes. It's like, it's very clear to the audience at that point that Palpatine had these intentions, but like, I don't know, having a virginal birth in Star Wars, it's like, it is a little too on the nose for me, and it just makes it a little more confusing too, as to how Palpatine knew that Qui-Gon and Co. would land on Tatooine at that specific spaceport and find this slave child and bring him along, win him through pod racing, win his freedom. It's like, there's so many factors here that, yeah, I just don't believe with Palpatine. I just don't believe that he had this master plan and that he was able to manipulate it.
It just works so much better if he doesn't have a master plan. And I also don't love the virginal birth thing. And more broadly, I've never cared for the prophecy element of the story in general. I think now, having gotten further into the Dune franchise and realizing that the parallels to Dune are not so much Luke Skywalker, but Anakin Skywalker, who is the parallel for Paul Atreides. Maybe he is trying to play into how Paul is sort of a child of prophecy as well. But what makes that interesting in Dune is the prophecy is manufactured by people with their own political agendas. And like, Paul can, have autonomy within this prophecy, but I just don't think Anakin being the chosen one actually adds anything meaningful to the story of either this or the original trilogy. I just don't really like it. I don't like George's justification that, like, in the end, Darth Vader does become the hero by killing Palpatine, and he does bring balance to the Force. It's like, no, it works better if it's just like, he was a good guy who went bad, and then at the last minute, he does the right thing, and he's kind of redeemed. And the prophecy is one of several things in this trilogy that's brought up and then never really elaborated on.
Yeah.
We'll talk about the most glaring example of this in episode 2, but it's just weird. It's never worked for me at all. And I also feel like Tatooine should not have been in this film at all, or any of these films. Anakin should not have been from there. I don't like that he's from Tatooine, and I just don't like how frequently Tatooine shows up in Star Wars media. Luke describes Tatooine in the original movie as,
well, if there's a bright center to the universe, you're on the planet that it's farthest from.
But based on how often we see it, it might as well be the center of the whole fucking universe, because it's in everything. They go to it in every film in this trilogy. More on this in episode 2 and 3, but hiding Luke on Tatooine with his actual biological family on his father's home planet is kind of dumb and uninteresting, in my opinion. I don't even think Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru have to be actual relatives of Anakin Skywalker. You know in How I Met Your Mother, how they always call us like Uncle Barney, Aunt Robin? It could be like that. They could just be guys that they know.
Right, yeah, just there in the background. Yeah, I that is a good point about Tatooine. Yeah, we do go there quite a lot. I do think that one of the, I don't really like the Tatooine sequence too much, especially today. Yeah. But I do think that the pod race sequence, it's one of the better parts of the movie. I think it's pretty cool.
I agree. The pod race is far and away the most well done sequence in the movie. It's genuinely well constructed, and it builds tension fantastically. The sound design is incredible. And also the choice to have no music play until the last lap is like actually an inspired decision, because you're just in the moment. You feel every like piece of equipment breaking. It is so much better done than the rest of this movie in terms of like scene construction. It's insane. That being said, it's so strange because it feels like a massive detour for the rest of the movie, and also it feels like the climactic sequence to a different film. Like, you could have a whole movie about a little slave kid who dreams of, say, like flying in the stars, and it like sees his way out of slavery through pod racing if he can win, and then he gets a benefactor from off planet, and then the climax of that movie is this race. But it's just in the middle of this other story and that's part of the problem with the Phantom Menace, the way it handles Anakin Skywalker, because Anakin doesn't really have a role in the broader narrative of this movie. He's the main character for this middle 40-minute chunk. And then the rest of the story doesn't really have anything to do with him, and he doesn't really understand what's going on. And I understand Padme is meant to be 14 in this movie, and I think Anakin's meant to be 10, but visually they look like they're 8 and 19. And the central relationship of this trilogy is the romance between these two. And I'm not gonna do the thing, it's like, Amidala's a groomer, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, no, she's not. It's fine. But it's like, what it means is you can't use any time in this movie to start building the romance, because it's inappropriate and gross. So it's like Anakin's relationship to Padme is like a kid who has a crush on his babysitter more than anything else. Yep. And that sucks, because Episode 1 should be where we get the seeds of the romance planted. Episode 2 is where they really commit to it, and then 3 is where it falls apart. But instead, because of the way they chose to do Anakin and Padme in this movie, all of that has to wait until Episode 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about Jake Lloyd a little bit.
Yeah, so Jake Lloyd, he was the actor for Kid Anakin, and I didn't realize this how young he was until I started doing research on this movie. But he was 8 years old at the time that they filmed this. You know, he'd been on like a few episodes of ER before doing this. I looked that up too, and he had done a movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger too.
Jingle All the Way.
Yeah,
it was one of my favorite Christmas movies as a kid. Is it any good? I don't know. I haven't watched it in a long time.
This is going to be my next question. Is it good? I'm not sure. I've never watched it. But yeah, I just feel so terrible for Jake Lloyd about this movie because, yeah, like we kind of talked about in the intros part of this episode, he got eviscerated by fans. Like his performance is wooden, but I don't think that's entirely his fault. I think that is partly George's fault. You know, you're working with kids here too. Kids don't understand the subtleties of acting yet at that age. He's 8 years old, for crying out loud. So like, yeah, he's still learning the world as it is. And like, you know, it is literally the job of a director to provide instruction and direction for the actors to say, well, I didn't like it how you did this way. Can you try it this way? Oh, like I want you to walk this way, do it this way, think about it this way. And when your director just kind of sits behind a computer screen and prefers these boring shots and wants to work with CGI as much as possible, you're not going to get great direction. And I don't know if the documentary provided any insight.
Yeah, well, actually, it kind of did because from what I saw, he was actually great with the kids.
No, it's not the food that's a problem. It's me. I'm used to saying Kuruskin.
All right.
Not Coruscant.
Coruscant. If you mispronounce it, it's okay.
No, everybody will start laughing.
No.
Okay, that's good.
He did a lot of great coaching and stuff like that. But so what's interesting is Jake Lloyd was chosen for the role over a more experienced actor who probably would have been better at consistently nailing the lines.
Are you an angel?
What?
An angel. I've heard the deep space pilots talk about them. They live on the moons of Iago, I think.
But they saw something in Lloyd. Like, he was less refined, but they saw, like, in special moments, he, like, shone through. And part of probably what happened was George even says in the documentary, like...
It's hard to know exactly where it's gonna trip itself up in a funny kind of way. Because in some stuff, I feel like that emotional scene with his mother, he was like right on the button every single time he did it. You don't quite know what you're going to get, and it's different every time, and sometimes it's really special, so you don't want to grind it into the ground.
And I don't want to interfere with the process too much because we might miss out on something really great. And I respect that impulse, but I think Jake got kind of thrown to the wolves a little bit. Like, he was fucking bullied at recess in school for this movie. Like, it's fucked up what happened to him.
He's had, like I did more research on him, and he retired from acting in 2001. 2 years after this movie came out. He was 10 years old when he said no more of this because of that bullying, like the scrutiny, the hatred that he received. And at least what I found on his Wikipedia page was that right now he's had a lot of mental health issues as a result of this movie.
Yes. And you know what's kind of fucked up too is like he has not gotten the warm like re-embrace of the Star Wars fandom like Hayden Christensen and Ahmed Best did. They have been, welcomed back with open arms by the Star Wars community. I don't think Jake Lloyd has been extended that, which is kind of messed up because he didn't do anything wrong. He gave like a not great performance when he was 8.
Yeah.
He did more than you did when you were 8, bitch.
Well, I don't think he deserved the hate that he got. It was unfair, it was unjustified. And can you imagine being cast in one of the biggest sci-fi franchises of all time when you're 8 years old and you're like the main role, such a pivotal role here, and you're 8 years old? That is such immense pressure. And then can you imagine having the rest of your life molded by that performance?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, that is your career-defining performance, and you gave it when you were 8 years old.
Well, and you even see how Harrison Ford treats the role of Han Solo, which, like, he wasn't a kid, but it was a career-defining performance that was one of his first major roles, and he's like, fuck you, stop talking about it, I want to talk about something else. But on a more fun note, what do you want to guess that Jake Lloyd's estimation for the budget of The Phantom Menace was? Because it's very cute and funny.
Oh, like when he was a kid?
Yeah, they asked him how much you think the movie cost, and he gave a number.
I bet he said $100.
No, okay.
I'm trying to get in the head of an 8-year-old.
Do you know how much money they're going to spend to make this movie?
Probably over $50,000.
They're definitely going to spend $50,000.
Which is much more than that, but still very cute, because the movie was like tens of millions of dollars. A positive I have is I love the aesthetic of Naboo. I think it just looks really great and expands the visual vocabulary of what feels like Star Wars. You know, I always hate when people make a criticism of something new. It's like, you know, it just doesn't feel like Star Wars. Well, maybe this new thing in a couple years will also feel like Star Wars, and then we have a broader understanding of what feels like Star Wars, and the franchise has grown and gotten better. Naboo does that. I like that.
I agree. Yeah, Naboo has got such cool ship designs, and their aesthetics neat in general. And I really like Queen Amidala's appearance in this. The decoy's appearance.
Sometimes Queen Amidala's in it too.
That's true. Yes.
I do like the subtle switches. Like there's the part on Coruscant where Anakin goes to say bye to Padme, and they tell him, like, oh, she's not here right now, but that's because she's in the queen makeup. And then when he talks to the queen, Padme is talking as Queen Amidala, not Padme, and she's like saying bye on behalf of it's good, it's clever.
That part's nice, yeah. And like her costuming and her makeup, it was inspired by, or the costumer was very inspired by the historical costuming of Mongolia and Chinese imperial cultures, which I think is great, and that comes through really well, and she just looks great in this movie. Yep. But yeah, Naboo's awesome, love it.
Yeah, you know what I don't love about Naboo?
Oh, yes.
And this is a nitpick, but I think it's funny, is their weird government structure. So I didn't realize until this rewatch, but the like old guy with the beard does say like we're a democracy, but I'm like, you have a queen. So I think it's weird that the monarchy on Naboo is an elected position, and then in the next film, Padme has to serve as senator, and my guess for that is that George, when writing episode 2, was like, why would the Queen of Naboo be involved in what's happening in the rest of this trilogy? She wouldn't. Okay, I'm giving Padme a new job. So the position of senator is an appointment made by the elected monarch. So Padme going from queen to senator is just so funny to me, because it's clearly just like this, but this is why I think it's ridiculous. Because if the monarchy was just a monarchy, hereditary, makes sense, you know, she's young. But according to Ballotpedia, I looked at this is on Ballotpedia for some reason. Padme Amidala was elected, was elected Princess of Theed at age 13, and then elected queen at age 14, which means the people of Naboo elected someone who was the same age as a high school freshman, and decided that was the most qualified person on their planet to be their sovereign. And it's just so funny to me. I've always thought it's hilarious.
Yeah, oh, it's such a good... She seems level-headed.
Yeah.
Let's make her the queen.
And it's like, I guess she's good at her job, but she is a child.
She did well, I guess, considering the circumstances.
She called for the vote of no confidence. It got Palpatine in the chancellor job.
Yeah, stupid kids. Don't elect kids to government. That's the lesson from episode 1.
She should be in what's it called? The Child Senate or whatever, kid government, whatever it's called.
The Model UN.
Thank you, Model UN. That's what I was thinking of.
You can be in the Model UN, the Model Galactic Senate.
Yes, the Model Galactic Senate.
And then next week you're going to go over to the Trade Federation and debate them.
Yes.
Their Model UN.
You have to debate a Nemoidian.
Oh, brother.
They'll just gaslight you and pretend that nothing is happening.
I was not aware of such failure. You must be mistaken.
We are not. One thing also, speaking of Naboo too, the Gungans are...
I mean Gungas?
Gungas. Whatever. I go back and forth on them a little bit, because I know that George was going after this kind of Ewok versus Empire parallel here. You know, Native versus Imperials. They're obviously outmatched, you know, technologically speaking and everything like that, strategically speaking. So it's like, yeah, I see what he was going.
Yeah, the shields are kind of OP though.
The shields are cool, and I like that. It's just, I think the creatures sometimes can be annoying, and
like the Gungans themselves.
Gungans, yes, and I don't mind the design of them, honestly. I think that they're kind of cool looking, and the large ears, I'm like, okay, that's fine. Why not? That's cool. I just think it's the way that they speak, and because I paid attention to it a lot more this time around, because I was really trying to understand what the fuck are they saying?
Yeah, I think he could have toned it down a little bit. Like, I'm fine with the different dialect, but I think it goes too far. Like George said.
I may have gone too far in a few places.
Yeah, it's confusing how they talk, and especially Jar Jar, and I don't really like how clumsy Jar Jar is in general. He's obviously there for kids, something...
He's the comedic relief.
Yes, he's the comedic relief, and he's something there for the kids to kind of laugh at. And I kind of want to pose a question here. Why did they even have to speak such a confusing mesh of English? Why couldn't they have just had their own subtitled language where maybe we don't even understand as the audience? I think that could have made... kind of just like Wookiee speak, but not Wookiee exactly, like an entirely different language, and then it could have made a more interesting journey for Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, and the Naboo too, of being like, how do we communicate with them that we need to get to the other side of the planet?
Yeah.
Like, we need to go warn them about an invasion. How do we communicate this when you can't verbally communicate? I think that could have been an interesting puzzle for the...
That could have been interesting too. I think probably the reason they didn't do that is Jar Jar is very important to the narrative of this movie, and having like he is one of the most important characters in the film, and having that character not be able to deliver dialogue.
Yes.
I think it could have been subtitled, and that would have been interesting. But I get why they went the way they did, but I also think that could have been intriguing. I will say too, I love the Gungan City.
It's cool.
So cool. And the reveal shot of it is beautiful. The music playing is also great. And I want to talk about Jar Jar a little bit because while I do find him a bit annoying, I think the reaction to him is way overblown.
I agree.
He is not the problem with this movie. And I don't think he's inherently more annoying than like a C-3PO, that's clearly the role he's filling. He is meant to be like this movie's C-3PO. But the reason I think he gets grating is because he has a response and says that response to like everything that happens on screen. He didn't need to do that. I think literally everything he witnesses, he comments on, and I think it does just get to a point where it's a little much. So if they had held back on that a little bit, I don't think he would have bothered anyone reasonable all that much. But there is an issue I have with Jar Jar. This is the real issue with Jar Jar, in my opinion. It's that he has no fucking growth in the movie at all. He kind of fucks about, and he's rewarded constantly and given higher and higher positions and more responsibilities, but he doesn't learn anything. He doesn't become like more of a noble leader or anything. He starts and ends the movie as a fucking klutz who's just in the right place at the right time. And that's kind of a bummer. I think it's a missed opportunity. But I will say the effects work on Jar Jar, especially for the time, it's incredible.
Oh yeah.
So good, and it's so well
it looks good today.
Integrated. It does look good today. And like there are some parts where it stands out, but this is something that I'll just fit in here. It's like until late in the game, they hadn't decided if they were just going to go with the physical suit or if they were going to do the full motion capture thing. So Ahmed Best was in the suit, but they did end up going with motion capture, and you can see them using the tracking dots and everything like that, like revolutionizing that technology. But they also found that having the suit as reference was very helpful. So they kind of, George makes a joke. It's like, well, we spent $100,000 on that suit. We're not even going to use it. And it's like, well, we're getting stuff out of it. Like, it is helpful. It was very interesting to watch them sort of like wrestle with, because this was a turning point technologically, and they were probably having to think like, okay, how will this look best? And they did a good job. Before we move on, we didn't have notes on it, but you remember the Darth Jar Jar theory?
I do.
How do you feel about it? Because I think it's dumb.
I think it's ridiculous, and especially when you see how Jar Jar acts in this entire film. He's just a bumbling fool. For a Sith to go that much of a distance to make yourself so outlandish and cartoonish, I just don't buy that.
Yeah, the theory was built on the fact that like they think it's playing on how Yoda introduces himself in Empire, where he's just like a silly little guy, and then he flips the switch. So that part I like. The part that I don't buy into, it's like, okay, if Darth Jar Jar is here, what's his purpose in the story? What's he trying to do? Where does he fit in with Palpatine's machinations? Because it feels like it wouldn't gel totally well, and that's my reservation about it.
Yeah, well, and it feels like, why would he be evil, and like why would he betray the Gungan people in general? Like, you know, those are your people. Why would you turn your back on them if that's the life that you knew?
Yeah, exactly. And I will say too, even though I don't love Jar Jar as a character, he should have been around more in episodes 2 and 3. In episode 3, he's in like one shot.
Yeah, they completely wrote him out.
Yeah, which is kind of sad. Like, if George had plans for this character, I'm curious to know what they are.
I am, yeah.
Because like I really don't hate him. I think he's okay. I think he's fine.
If he was going for that Darth Jar Jar angle, I would be interested to know what his plans were in the next 2 movies, like how he was planning to.
Yeah. If it is real, I want to know about it.
Yes, I would love to learn more about that. But speaking of thought experiments, too, you know, if Jar Jar was a dark antagonistic Sith character, I want to pose a different idea here too. Okay. What if in this movie, like, Count Dooku was introduced as the main antagonist and Darth Maul was his apprentice? Because then we wouldn't know that Lord Sidious is involved at all at that point. You know, and then so the first movie is like, oh, okay, so we have a new evil kind of character to be looking at, Count Dooku, and that would give some more time to give him some growth in the first movie, and then the next movie would bring more continuity, I think, between the 2 movies. Yeah. And then you could even save the reveal till the end of like episode 2 of like, oh, here's Lord Sidious, and he's been working with Count Dooku the whole time, kind of deal. Yeah. What do you think about that?
So it's an interesting idea, and I agree that is a fault of this trilogy, that there is not. I mean, there's Sidious, of course, but that there's no like Vader going through it. Like there's no villain like that. But I actually have different thoughts about Count Dooku. I'm going to save them for the episode 2 discussion because that's where it fits in there. But one other thing I do think, though, is that Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon should have switched places in the Tatooine arc. What I mean by that is Obi-Wan should have been the one to lead the away mission with Padme and Jar Jar and R2 into... R2 and 3PO did not need to be in this trilogy at all, but that's a whole separate thing. But I think Obi-Wan should have been the one doing this because maybe it could have been like a trial, like Qui-Gon is without Obi-Wan knowing it, giving him his final trial for Jedi Knight. And it's like, how does he handle this new environment and this situation? And it would have given him time to meet and bond with Anakin and bond with Padme. These are our 3 leads. We need them to be friends and know each other and like each other. Just as is, Obi-Wan in this movie is a very minor character.
Yeah.
And essentially forms no relationship to Anakin Skywalker until the final scenes of the movie. And I think that's a big problem because, like the relationship with Padme that is not allowed to blossom due to the age difference, this relationship is not allowed to blossom because they don't fucking meet each other. They like shake hands, and then Obi-Wan's like, the boy is dangerous. And then they train, like he trains him at the end. Why isn't Obi-Wan the one finding Anakin and seeking him out and bringing him back? I think that makes a lot more sense. And that transitions into just the Jedi in general. As I've gotten older, have appreciated that they're supposed to be weird and distant and like kind of jackasses a little bit. But I thought it was really weird in The Phantom Menace just how irritated they seem by the whole having to deal with Anakin at all. Like they just seem bored and ready to get it over with. It's very strange.
Yeah.
They just come across like a really dismissive management board of this organization, and I'm sure that was part of the intent, but it feels odd. And also, like what Red Letter Media says, like we're expected to know too many things we are and are not told. The Jedi Code.
Yeah.
What is it?
Yeah.
What is, like, I know. In Expanded Universe, it's written down, I can fucking read it. I'm talking about the movies. The movie never explains what it is. It mentions it. It says Qui-Gon doesn't follow it, and that if he did, he would be on the council. Qui-Gon, I think Lucas and Filoni have both mentioned this, that Qui-Gon is sort of more meant to be what the Jedi are supposed to be, and that they've lost their way, and that's accounting for their differences, and that if Qui-Gon hadn't died, Anakin's fate might be different, and that's why the song Duel of the Fates is called that, because it's the duel for the fate of Anakin Skywalker. That's the whole thing. So I'm like, okay, what's the difference? What is Qui-Gon all about that the Council isn't? And why is that distinction important?
Yep.
Because we are never given any philosophy from Qui-Gon at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They don't give us any information on what the code is.
No.
It's just like, a Jedi is a good person. That's kind of it. You know?
You're also never given any information on what a Sith is. which is why I'm still fine referring to Snoke and Kylo Ren as Sith, because what's the difference? There is none. As far as the movies go, it's never outlined, and it doesn't matter. They're just like bad guys. But speaking of Jedi and Sith, let's talk about lightsabers. Lightsaber fights.
Lightsaber fights. Yeah, I think that Duel of Fates at the end between Qui-Gon Jinn, Obi-Wan, and Darth Maul, it's as epic as I remember it being. It is so cool.
Yeah.
There's definitely parts of it where I'm just like, wow, that was really stupid of him. Like where Qui-Gon jumps down like multiple platforms to like attack Darth Maul. Like he lands like right next to like where the lightsaber blade could just like cut his feet off. It's like, what were you thinking, Qui-Gon? Don't just
no.
right there. Like think about your landing more. But I think it is really cool. They did a really awesome job with the choreography.
Yeah. Again, stealing from Red Letter Media, but I think the fights in this trilogy, but especially this film, are just a little bit too sterile. I'm mostly fine with it on rewatch until Qui-Gon dies. And then, because like you see Obi-Wan getting pissed and he's ready to fight, and then they go back to the same, like, I'm sure Star Wars diehards who like love the expanded stuff and the visual dictionaries will be like, oh, he switches combat styles, and you can totally tell. It's like, I can't feel the emotional difference. It's like, compare that to the fights in the originals or the sequels, where like you can really tell a character's state of mind based on their choreography.
Yeah.
And that's not really part of these films. And I understand the vision was like, this is an art form that has been lost by the time of the originals, and we're seeing it at its peak where they're the masters, right? I get it. I understand. It doesn't work for me. One part of the fight that really does work for me, though, is the quieter moment when they're in the laser hallway, which, like, what the fuck is that? But but I love because the Maul and Qui-Gon interaction, like, Maul is fucking stewing. He's pissed and he's ready to fight, and Qui-Gon is meditating. He just closes his eyes and he sits down, and that is so good. I love it. I love it so much.
Yeah, Obi-Wan should have used the quick, fast run.
I know, yeah. At the beginning on the droid ship, they just like almost teleport, and then it's never used again for the rest of the trilogy. It's
They can move really quick that one time.
very funny. But again, like, that's a nitpicky thing that it's whatever. It's just funny.
They didn't need to add it in there because it adds tension to the scene. Him running very slowly.
Yes. And Qui-Gon's death works, kind of. I think the problem is that Obi-Wan is such a minor character in the movie that we can't really feel his loss because we don't know him. We know Ben, but we don't really know Obi-Wan yet. That's remedied a lot in the next movie. But one thing about this sequence and the whole ending of the movie, and we've like known about this critique for a long time, but like the ending multiplication effect thing, where it's like you got the Jedi fight, you got Padme saying, you got Anakin in the spaceship, you got the Gungans, and you're cutting between 4 different stories very quickly. Ben Burt, who's the editor of the film, he's explaining to Lucas in the behind-the-scenes doc.
In a space of about 90 seconds, you go from lamenting the death of, a hero, to escape, to slightly comedic with Jar Jar, to Anakin returning when his little kind of tag. It's a lot, and it's a very short time.
Boggles the mind.
Your mind as a viewer is not emotionally able to keep up with the roller coaster that you're on because it's moving too quickly. But I think it was really interesting watching them view the movie and sort of start to realize and talk about these problems at this point in time, because it's like where Star Wars famously came together in the edit and became what it was in the edit. It seems like the flaws in the Phantom Menace were not apparent to them until the edit. And by then it was almost too late, because it seems like it may have been budgetary. It may have been they were just trying to stick to the release date. They did show in the doc that like this movie releases on this day no matter what. But it is very interesting, and I think it speaks to trust in the filmmaking process, because when you're on set, everything feels and looks ridiculous, right? And you, especially on a big movie like this with a lot of blue screen and stuff like that, and you are just trusting that the people further on down the line are going to make you look good, make it work. Yeah. And in this case, the problems were too woven into how the story flowed to fix. And George says that like we can try to mitigate the negative effects of that, but there's only so much we can do, because like one thing leads into the other, and that's how the sequence goes. And he's right, and that's part of why reshoots exist. That's why big productions now have reshoots scheduled before principal photography even happens, because you want to, if you get to this point, and it's not working, you want to be able to go back and fix it. And I'm curious what the Phantom Menace would have been if this movie's schedule had been...
Yeah, if they actually had
that, yeah. But one thing I also found very interesting in the doc is you can see very early in pre-production that Lucas went through the storyboard with the visual effects team, and what he did was like he had 2 different color highlighters, like I think it was yellow and purple, and he was highlighting. It's like, okay, this is you guys, visual effects, this is all going to be real.
I would say, in the end, that this is set.
Yeah, we've got one little piece of wall. Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
2 pieces of wall maybe. Yes.
And then this is you guys.
This is how this process is supposed to work for VFX, because you storyboard it out ahead of time, and the VFX team can spend the entire rest of pre-production through production into post-production working on the visual effects for those shots that you've chosen. Take note, Marvel Studios, because this is how you do it. There's like credit to George. He understood he was pushing the boundary on tech, and he was putting in the effort to make sure his team could make it work.
So everyone knew which part.
Everyone knew, and yeah, and there is kind of a funny clip where he's going through really quick, and he fucks it up and does the wrong way. He's like, "No, I was feeling so good about my ability to do this." It's really fun, but yeah, you have to give. Like, we give George shit for his shot choices in the dialogue scenes, but like credit where it's due, he's doing this right. Yeah, and now I have some more trivia that didn't really fit in neatly to the conversation, but there was a massive storm in Tunisia when they were filming the Tatooine stuff.
Really?
75-mile-per-hour winds. It rolled through the filming location. It destroyed a ton of the life-size pod racer models, and like all of the props within the little town of Mos Espa were just like wrecked. Yeah, and I believe George says in the doc that a similar storm happened on the set of Star Wars. I think you mentioned that in our rewind on the original.
I do remember that.
But that's very interesting that happened. But also, like, Rick McCullum and a lot of other people are walking through the set. It's like, this is bad. Like, this is really fucked. Because it is. Like, some of the pod racers were split in half. Like, Anakin's engines were split in half.
Oh, man.
But then George comes on, and he's like, we'll be all right. We got it. Like, he put on a brave face, he was like leading the team, and he got him through it, and it worked.
Who knows?
I think that's really interesting. Also, the Nemoidians, the Trade Federation guys, they had like animatronics within the mask. It was really cool to watch them work, and like, I think they were assisted with remote controls, but the actors like would do exaggerated dialogue movements, and it would move the mouse or the mouth of the mask. It was really neat to look at. And also, this is probably just digital editing was becoming available, and you could see Ben Burtt and George Lucas in the editing room, and instead of just like taking the best take, George would be like, okay, well, I really like what Ewan's doing in this corner of the shot, and over here, like, Panaka is moving, but we don't want him to move, so let's splice Ewan into this shot and keep this thing of Panaka where he's standing still, and if we time it just right. So it was like, it wasn't even just taking the best take, it was taking the best parts of multiple takes and putting them together. Like you can kind of do with compositing more cleanly now too, but it's like they were just cutting the same shot in different ways. It was very interesting to watch. Ben Burtt is like, this is game-changing. Like, I couldn't tell how he felt about it necessarily, and I don't even know how I feel about it, but it was really interesting to watch the evolution of the editing process happen there. Also, it seems like Jedi Padawans may have at one point had 2 braids instead of 1, because you see Ewan McGregor get his haircut for the thing, because he had to have it really long to grow, to like cut it for the braid.
Oh yeah.
And they left one on each side. And they also discussed the idea here that like the different little rope knots going down the braid are meant to signify like milestones in a Padawan's training. So all of those are supposed to have like a specific meaning for how far you are along in your training development, which I thought was kind of interesting. But yeah, what are some of your final thoughts on the Phantom Menace before we move on?
I had no idea about so much.
I know, it was really cool.
Phantom Menace, I think I'm glad we watched this movie overall, and I'm glad we went back and checked it out. And I'm pleased to know that I don't have to watch it again for a very long time. But you know, I think as an adult, there's a lot more of this movie that I can appreciate, especially with, you know, just the bureaucratic nature of things, and like, you see the cogs in the machine, I think, in the Phantom Menace, especially when they go to the Senate, and it's all slowed down. It's like, oh, before we can help you, first we need to persuade the Senate to appoint, you know, a commission to go check out the validity of your allegations. It's like,
even though Valorum had already selected Jedi Knights who were presumably trustworthy to go handle the situation, and they gave him a report on it.
yeah, like it's confusing, but like I can appreciate the slowness of the bureaucracy here. So I can definitely connect more with Naboo's struggle in Phantom Menace today rather than when I was a kid.
Yes. I will say the execution of those political scenes in this movie, like, they weren't done in a way that resonates with children. And if these are meant to be children's movies, which they are, we'll talk more about that in Revenge of the Sith. But I think the politics of this trilogy is its most interesting element. I just think the execution of it is very dry. And that even may have been intentional. But I will say I still really don't like the experience of watching this movie, except for the pod race part. And I will say, actually, I do like the reveal of Padme being the decoy. I mean, it's stupid in most of the narrative, but I like that it seems like she even took Qui-Gon by surprise there. Like, cause,
a little bit.
Yeah, and I like the element of when she's like insistent on going into town with them because the queen is curious about the planet. She's secretly the queen going to investigate it for herself. I like stuff like that. But I've grown to appreciate the craft and the vision on this rewatch. But yeah, it still doesn't work as a film for me, but I can tell the passion is there. Yes. I don't agree with the critique that George only came back for money and business purposes. I think he felt this story needed to be told. Do I agree with him? I don't know. Yeah, I think the biggest problem with it is Anakin being a little kid and not interacting with Padme and Obi-Wan in ways that build towards the main relationships of the trilogy. But yeah, I'm going to close with another Roger Ebert thing. I used to read Ebert all the time when he was alive, but I will say he described the dialogue as pretty flat and straightforward, although seasoned with a little quasi-classical formality, as if the characters had read but not retained Julius Caesar, which I thought was really funny. And he also closed out, he gave the movie 3.5 stars. His rating system was 4 stars, so he liked The Phantom Menace.
Oh, wow.
And he closed out his rather positive review by saying, "We are standing at the threshold of a new age of epic cinema, I think, in which digital techniques mean the budgets will no longer limit the scope of scenes. Filmmakers will be able to show us just about anything they can imagine," which I think will transition us greatly into the next 2 parts of this discussion. So that's Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace.
Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. It's about a 10-year gap. We pick up with Anakin and Obi-Wan protecting Senator Amidala as she's trying to uncover who's behind assassination attempts on her life. And shit ensues.
And Padme is the chief senator opposed to the Military Creation Act. I think that's the important part, because someone's trying to kill her for opposing the military, and Obi-Wan discovers a secret military being built. Oh my god. But for me, I actually think this is overall the worst of the 3 prequels. But it's bad in like funnier ways to watch than Episode 1 is, I think. According to IMDb trivia, the working title for this movie was called Jar Jar's Big Adventure, in response to the backlash the character got in the first film, which I think that is very funny. It's just it's written very strangely, and I think it leans too heavily on the visual effects in a way where the Phantom Menace balanced them much better. And I think you can tell that in a lot of the shots and scenes in this movie. Like, everything is just too crisp. It doesn't look like a real place a lot of the time. Even though there are real locations in the film as well. Another Ebert thing about the dialogue. So in the classic movie adventures-inspired Star Wars dialogue was often colorful, energetic, witty, and memorable. The dialogue in Episode 2 exists primarily to advance the plot, provide necessary information, and give a little screen time to continuing characters who are back for a new episode. The only characters in this stretch of the film who have inimitable personal styles are the beloved Yoda and the hated Jar Jar Binks, whose idiosyncrasies turned off audiences in The Phantom Menace. Yes, Jar Jar's accent may be odd and his mannerisms irritating, but at least he's a unique individual and not a bland cipher. The other characters, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Padme Amidala, Anakin Skywalker, seem so strangely stiff and formal in their speech that an unwary viewer might be excused for thinking they were the clones soon to be exposed. What are some of your initial thoughts on Attack of the Clones?
Oh, I agree with a lot of that statement, because yeah, I like a lot of this movie because of nostalgia from my childhood and just the novelty that this movie brought to the Star Wars universe when I was a kid.
It was probably the first one you saw in theaters, right?
I think so, yeah. I don't remember seeing I don't remember seeing Phantom Menace in theaters, but I remember seeing this in theaters and being just ecstatic about it as a kid, because I was like, this is cool, this is new. There's a lot more action in this one. It feels a little bit better in some respects, but I agree that the acting is very wooden and there's so much CGI. It feels like, yeah, as these prequels go on, the use of CGI goes up and the practical effects go down. And yeah, the dialogue is really just to push the plot along, just like you said. And that definitely stands out to me more on this viewing today. I don't love this movie. I think that there's some good parts of it, like the battle on Geonosis, I think is really cool, and the detective work by Obi-Wan is, I think the better part of the movie compared to Anakin and Padme. But what are your initial thoughts?
Like I said, I don't love this. I think it's kind of dumb in a lot of ways. The romance doesn't really work, and I'll talk about more why later. A lot of it doesn't really work. It doesn't really add up or make much sense. I think it's the perfect 12-year-old movie, though.
Yeah.
It's like there's lots of cool fights, lights everywhere, things blowing up, war is happening. War! I found it very interesting just how many people were auditioning for the part of Anakin Skywalker. You want to run through that list real quick? Because it's a lot of big names.
Yeah, I did not realize it was this many people. But yeah, a lot of different people auditioned for it. Obviously, the role went to Hayden Christensen, but people like Ryan Felipe, Misha Collins, Paul Walker. Wow, that would have been entirely different.
Yeah.
Colin Hanks, that would have been so different. Yeah. Colin Hanks, Tom Hanks' son, Christian Bale and Heath Ledger, James Van Der Beek, Joshua Jackson, Eric Christian Olsen, Eric Von Detten, Chris Klein, Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that one. George really wanted Leo, partially because of Titanic.
I get that, yeah, joining on that.
The doomed romance, that makes sense.
Not really a mystery. Everyone knows that I'm going to the dark side. It's kind of like the Titanic.
Sure, yeah, and then Jonathan Brandis. And I guess, yeah, Titanic was like big. I remember bits and pieces of the Phantom Menace thing, and he was like, oh, we're never going to be Titanic. Titanic's
yeah. Yeah, Red Letter Media made that seem like George was bitter and jealous, but like in the full context of that moment, he's not. He's just like, he was just kind of like, this is the biggest movie in the world. Like, it's like, we're not going to beat that. It's fine. Yeah. Was kind of his thing.
But yeah, he probably saw Leo and was like, he's an excellent fit for this role. Yeah. I think he could have been good in it for sure, but
yeah, I guess.
And then in the end, Hayden Christensen got the part primarily because he and Natalie Portman, quote, looked good together, end quote, from IMDb trivia. I don't know where that came from for that.
Yeah, I know. That's the thing with IMDb trivia. It's like, is this true?
Yeah. I could imagine George being like, yeah, they just look the best together. But yeah, all those different people, like even Heath Ledger or Christian Bale, that would have been such a different performance, different aesthetic too.
But I will say, like, I don't think Hayden Christensen does a bad job. I think he's doing exactly what he was told to do. He's playing an angsty teenager. And there are moments of brilliance in his performance, I'd say mostly in the next movie, but some here too. That's the thing. It's like people like to put the blame for this movie and the next one squarely on the shoulders of Hayden Christensen and his bad acting. But I'm like, guys, no one's very good in these movies. Natalie Portman's kind of bad. Samuel L. Jackson is bad. I think it's his worst performance.
Oh, yes.
His career. He's been in worse movies, but I don't think he's ever been worse than Mace Windu. And I love Sam Jackson. He's awesome.
He's the man.
And Ewan McGregor is good as Obi-Wan, but he could have been better. This is the directing. That's how you know it's a directing problem. And I love George. I think George is great. But we've always talked about, everybody's always talked about, the directing actors and writing dialogue are not his strong suits. He's better at other stuff. But yeah, let's dive into the romance.
Yeah, Padme and Anakin. I cannot stand the dialogue between them in this movie. It sounds like it was written by a 4-year-old man. It seems like George just didn't take a writing class on how to do dialogue for people.
It's just
never really listened to real people talk. That's how it comes across.
Or he's trying to make it sound like professions of love that a 19-year-old would give, because that's what Anakin is.
If he's going for immature language, maybe I see that perspective, but like, I don't know. He just, because Anakin, he does come across as arrogant in this movie time and time again, and I understand he's an angsty teenager, but he also comes off as manipulative and controlling and misogynistic through his...
He's very creepy.
He's so creepy, oh my god. But in that fireplace scene too, like when it's him and Padme by the fireplace, the dialogue really frustrates me in that scene, and I think it always has, but on this rewatch I noticed that it feels like Anakin just blames Padme for all of his thoughts and feelings and emotions, basically pulling the "you're tormenting me because you're so hot" card.
You are in my very soul. Torment.
Yeah.
It's like, god damn it, dude, can you step back and listen to yourself for a second? You're having the thoughts. It's not her fault that you're having these thoughts, dude.
Well, it's very uncomfortable, but I think a big problem with this romance is that the scenes are in the wrong order. The kiss happens way too soon. They kiss after the fucking I don't like sand thing, and there's no build up to that happening, really. It's just she's hot. And that's it.
She's wearing a backless dress.
Yeah, she's wearing a backless dress, and they have some like cute, awkward flirting like very early on when they first see each other. I think that's fine. But I feel like their dynamic has no consistent build up because like from scene to scene. So like one scene, they're on so I think it's the kiss that happens first, and then that ends very awkwardly because like I shouldn't have done that. It's like, okay, it's fine. And then the next scene, I think, is the dinner date, and they're like having a happy dinner date. And then you get the fireplace scene where the vibe is totally shifted and they're like really fucking angsty and like, this is forbidden. We can't do this. It'll be bad for us. And then they go to the fucking waterfalls and they're having their little waterfall date where Anakin admits to supporting a fascist dictatorship.
I thought that came before, but I can't.
Maybe I'm getting the order wrong, but it does zigzag like this. And like have the nice dates first, then the kiss, and then the fireplace scene. And then they kind of like put it to the side while they go to Tatooine to do his shit with his mom. And then that way, when they like decide to submit to their feelings in the arena, like it flows better, you know? As it is, it's very, very hot and cold.
Yeah, I see that.
And the Obi-Wan and Anakin scenes have a similar issue too, because when they're first like meeting with Padme, Anakin mouths off, and Obi-Wan's like, "What the fuck, man?" And then in the next scene, they're just totally fine. What is going on, dudes? It's like they go back and forth between friendly conversation and adversarial dialogue, like on a dime, and they never feel like friends. And that's a big problem, but I forgot what I was gonna say. According to the IMDb trivia again, the little aggressive negotiations and diplomatic solution lines they have at their little dinner date, that was ad-libbed because George wasn't happy with the dialogue he wrote for that scene. If true, I kind of like that because there's a fun little callback to that in the arena where...
Yes.
This a diplomatic solution?
No, I call it aggressive negotiations.
Like, it's fun. It's one of the few times the dialogue like loops back on itself in a satisfying way. Yeah, the romance just doesn't work, and I want it to. You need it to for this movie. And I had another point, but I totally forgot it, and I wish I hadn't.
It'll come back to you. Yeah. While we're talking about the romance, one thing popped in my head while I was watching it, and it's kind of a rabbit hole thought experiment. But, so Padme's... They're getting away to Naboo because she's being chased.
Yes.
Hunted down. People want to kill her for some weird reason.
Because she's opposed to the Military Creation Act.
Yeah, that.
Oh, can I interject real quick just to say something I love? I love the opening sequence of the film flying into Coruscant with all the fog and the big clouds.
That part was cool, yeah.
It's very interesting looking, and it's a different look at the city that we see from the previous film.
It does kind of provide a good ambiance. But if Padme, she thought that the lake country of Naboo would be the safest place on Naboo, and it was safe. There was no attack on them at all. But objectively speaking, isn't Gunga City the safest place on Naboo? Because it's underwater, and I think it would be the last place the Trade Federation would look on Naboo for her. But I'm also kind of glad that we didn't go back there because we were already there. We don't need to go back. And I like the scenic area, you know, they went to Italy for those scenes, and it just
Lake Como.
Yeah, Lake Como is beautiful. It's such a gorgeous location. So those are beautiful scenes, but there was just something I thought about this.
And that's the real reason that it's the safest place for them to go, because George wanted them to have pretty places to go on dates, which is fine because it's supposed to be a romance thing.
Yeah. It looks great. It looks great. Yeah, and I think Lake Como, that's where some of those coolest shots are. I already talked about that really cool shot of Anakin like standing there meditating. It's very symmetrical. It's a very cool shot. I thought that's one of the most beautiful shots of the entire movie. I also really like when they're on Naboo and it's kind of their shadows speaking to each other.
Oh, you mean on Tatooine?
Yeah, on Tatooine, thank you. Before Anakin goes off to kill all the Tuskens. You know, I thought that's a really cool scene. Like just the cinematography there was neat. And just in general, I really like the seismic charges.
Oh, it's the best sound effect that's ever existed. It's so cool.
Beautiful. It sounds neat, and I think that whole sequence is just beautiful too.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And I really like all those panning shots of like the clone army, displaying the whole scale of the army and just their climactic battle at the end. I think that those are all just great visuals.
On the asteroid belt sequence, of course, is referencing the Empire asteroid belt sequences. A lot of this movie tries to visually play on Empire.
Yes.
I remember the thing I was going to say. There are a couple things that don't make sense. I'm going to loop back to the Phantom Menace real quick too. But in the Phantom Menace, there's the whole blockade on Naboo. One, the idea of blockading a planet seems difficult. Like, you know, just go around. But also, when they go back to Naboo at the end of the movie, there's only one ship. The blockade's gone.
Yep.
Where did they go? Why did they leave? But also in this movie, the assassination on Padme, and I'm going to put in a clip from the Cosmonaut Variety video because it describes it funnier than I can. But it's like...
So Palpatine needs Padme dead, but he doesn't want to do it himself. So he asks Count Dooku to go kill Padme. But Count Dooku doesn't want to do it himself. So Count Dooku asks Jango Fett to go kill Padme. But Jango Fett doesn't want to do it himself. So he asks his shapeshifter friend to go kill Padme. But the shapeshifter sends a robot to go kill Padme. And if you really want to be an asshole and get even more granular, the droid says, I'll send these little bugs to go kill Padme. Palpatine sends a man who sends a man who sends a shapeshifter who sends a robot who sends bugs to go kill Padme.
And then also, this is a moment where Obi-Wan jumps out and catches the robot, right? That should have been Anakin. He's the one who's in love, I guess, with Padme. Yeah. He should have been the one, and Obi-Wan should have been like... I hate it when he does that. Back to something that I like, though. The arena fight on Geonosis, before the Jedi show up, is great.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just Anakin, Padme, and Obi-Wan in there, like, surviving without the lightsabers and all doing their different things.
That is
I love watching how each of them reacts to the situation and uses their own, like, abilities. Padme just climbs to the top and like uses the chain as a whip. Obi-Wan just gets loose and starts fighting with the thing, and then Anakin uses the Force to calm the reek. I know what the animal's called because I had that fucking action figure. He uses the Force to calm it down and then rides around, and then they use it to, like, I liked that a lot because we get to see all those different fighting styles, and also there's extra tension because they're unarmed and they have to improvise. I also like, I don't think Portman's acting is very good in this movie, but I like the way Padme is written in this movie, especially towards the end when they're on Tatooine and Anakin's like, I just got strict orders to stay here. And then she's like, no, you got orders to protect me. And I'm going to go help Obi-Wan. So if you want to protect me, you have to come with me. Yay, that's fun. Yeah, and we'll talk more about that in Revenge of the Sith, because that does not stay true through the trilogy.
Yeah, she is at the height of her badassery.
I like Padme as a character in episode 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think she's great. And yeah, I like the GNO sequence overall. I think it's really cool. All the visuals are really neat. I just think that, there's some things about it that hinder it a little bit. And I think one of the things, Yoda and Dooku having a literal lightsaber battle doesn't make any fucking sense. Logistically, from one perspective, it's like Dooku is physically stronger. He has wider reach than Yoda. Yeah, it doesn't make sense for him, for like, a 6 foot tall person be fighting someone who is very short. It doesn't make a lot of sense for them to be fighting hand-to-hand combat with a little sword, with a laser sword. Like, it makes sense when you're about the same stature and size and weight. I think that they said it in the Plinkett review that in the OG trilogy, Yoda and Palpatine, they never whipped out a lightsaber. They were just all about the Force. the Force was their power, and that's where it came from. So I think I like how the duel starts between Dooku and Yoda, where it's just a mind battle about the Force, going back and forth with each other. Like, that's cool, and that's fine, and I think that's how it should have stayed.
Yeah, I don't even like that, honestly.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the way it's executed, it's just so, like, rocks, throw, rocks, catch. And it's, like, very slow. It's like Yoda in Empire.
Look at me. Judge me by my size, do you? And where you should not. For my ally is the Force. And a powerful ally it is.
Red Letter Media says this, but it's like it's mystical. It's something beyond physical capabilities, and when you put a character like Yoda into a physical sword fight, it makes it so that he is at a disadvantage when his character should be above that. Like, not only should we never see Yoda use a lightsaber, we should never see Yoda fight. I think Palpatine is another character who we really shouldn't see fight. Like in Jedi, he attacks Luke, but he doesn't fight because he can't. He relies on the people around him to do that. But his strength is in his hatred, and Yoda's strength is in the Force. And I think both of these characters, and in the next film, we see them both fight each other, which is a horrible fight.
Maddening.
But it's something that I think I don't like that George wanted to do this, and I don't like how much fans embraced it, and it's one reason why I push back so hard about people being mad about Luke in The Last Jedi not physically showing up to Crate, because what Luke does in The Last Jedi, what I want from a character like Yoda in this. Luke wins. Once Luke shows up, no one dies except for him. He's not even there, and he's able to save like hundreds of people's lives. And that is what it means to be a powerful Jedi. Not being good with a sword.
Yes.
Necessarily.
It's about the mentality. Right. And I think that's what, a Jedi is about. It's like, how do you maintain this positive perspective and keep things going in the right direction for everyone?
Exactly. Also, like in the first film, we essentially get no political motivations for the Separatists at all. They're disillusioned with the Republic. Why? What do they want? We get the Techno Union and the banking clan and these other people, and it's like, okay, just some explanation for what these guys want and why the conflict has gotten so bad that they're willing to go to war. What the fuck?
Yeah, it is not clearly described why these people are joining together and leaving. Like, we just know that they are. It makes no sense. And they're all just painted as bad guys.
Yes, we'll talk about them more later in this, actually.
The Separatists get no airtime except for them to just be like, yeah, you got my support for the fight against the Republic, and it's like, well, yeah, what are you getting out of this?
Well, and it's like, this ties into Revenge of the Sith too, and I'm going to elaborate on this in a moment, but like, the crawl of that movie says there are heroes on both sides. No, there are not. Objectively, there are no heroes on the Separatist side in the movies. In the cartoon, the Clone Wars, there are. And that makes this conflict, that fleshes out this conflict and makes it interesting and make more sense. And the Separatists having no motivation wouldn't necessarily be a problem if this trilogy wasn't about how the weakness and corruption at the heart of Republic led to its downfall. We need to explore that. That's what the movies are about. He never does anything with it.
He never does. And one of the things too in this movie, like, I know that it was more Lord Sidious pushing for Padme to be killed because of the military authorization, but Newt Gunray is still obsessed with killing Padme in this movie.
Yeah.
And I don't understand why. Is he just out for vengeance at this point? Like, it's so petty that his motivation is, he's like, I'm not going to sign the deal and join your whole thing, Count Dooku.
Until her head is on my desk.
Yeah, until her head's on my desk. It's like, why are you so obsessed with killing this one senator just because she foiled your plan like 10 years ago? Like, you're so obsessed over this. Like, maybe Palpatine's secretly manipulating his thoughts.
I don't know.
But I don't know. He's just a fucking idiot.
Newt is the dumbest person that's ever existed. Like, he's so stupid.
He's so dumb. One thing I also wanted to get touch on before you get too far ahead too was that I feel like there's a lot of parts of this movie that could have been shortened or moved. I kind of talked about that before too, but like, there's so many parts we kind of already talked about in the Phantom Menace, where you're cutting between things really quickly and it kind of undercuts the emotional beats of the moment. But like in this movie, it feels like I noticed it a lot on this rewatch, but there's these establishing shots of where every character is in the Coruscant speeder chase sequence. We know where everyone is at all moments of what they're doing.
Yeah.
Do we really need all those shots of Obi-Wan landing the speeder, of Anakin finding the speeder and getting in the speeder and like running around, getting to the thing and stuff like that? It's confusing to me that we needed all that.
Okay, speaking of the speeder chase real quick, dude, Zam Wessel is a changeling, shapeshifter. This is another thing that is introduced and never paid off or followed up on. This, in my mind, falls into the category of Chekhov's gun. Do you know what Chekhov's gun is, or do you remember?
I think so, but
it's a storytelling writing rule where if you, in a play, introduce that there is a gun on the wall in Act 1, the gun must go off by the end of Act 3. Because otherwise, why did you draw our attention to the gun? Sam Wessel, they call out that she is a shapeshifter. And then they go into the bar, and Obi-Wan is like, well, in that case, be extra careful. And then, does she shapeshift? No. The visual storytelling of the scene makes it seem like she has shapeshifted into either Obi-Wan or Anakin and is sneaking up on the other one. That would have been interesting. But no, she pulls a gun and approaches Obi-Wan and tries to shoot him.
Yeah. So you don't use your ability at all?
So why was she written to be a shapeshifter? Because it doesn't matter.
Yep.
It's just a waste of a beat, you know?
Yeah, it is.
It's just a waste of a tiny bit of time, but it's there, and it makes you wonder why. And we're gonna talk about the biggest example of this in just a second.
Yes, but yeah, there's some other things too that I noticed, like sequences on Kamino, which I like Kamino overall. I think it's fine, but you know, I think
aesthetically it's so cool. Yeah. The design is so neat.
The aesthetics of that place is awesome, but like I think some of those dialogue moments could have been shorter or just like tightened up a little bit more. Like there's like a whole part where she's like walking Obi-Wan to the door and being like, "Thanks for staying with us. It's been so nice having you." It's like, do we need that?
I think we did, actually, because it's phony hospitality. It's like,
oh sure, yeah.
I think it's important. But about the Kamino sequence, who the fuck is Jedi Master Sifo Dyas? This is the most baffling thing in these movies. Speaking of things that are brought up and never followed up on once again, I spent my entire childhood thinking this guy was secretly Qui-Gon.
Me too.
Because Qui-Gon was also killed 10 years prior, and Sifo Dyas is literally never mentioned again in the trilogy. I think they do something in the cartoon with him. It's wild that this guy plays such a pivotal role in the plot of this trilogy and is a complete non-entity. Like, who is he or she? Why did they do this? Or were they working for Sidious? Why? What the fuck?
Sifo Dyas is I think the biggest mistake of this movie, and honestly one of the biggest mistakes of the prequels, because yeah, we have no prior knowledge of who this character is, which made him incredibly confusing as a child. And for everyone who's watching this movie, they're gonna have the same question: who the fuck is Master Sifo Dyas? Yeah. Is he Qui-Gon?
I still have this question.
Yeah, I'm like, who is this guy? And like, I'm in your same boat. Like, I automatically assumed he's Qui-Gon Jinn. I think in the movie too, Obi-Wan's like, did my master express to you who this army is for? And so that implies that it's Qui-Gon Jinn.
But he means it is like just all the masters.
Exactly.
Like, But then, not Boba Fett, Jango Fett says that he was hired by a man called Tyrannus, and we find out that Count Dooku's name is Darth Tyrannus. So, did he do it?
It's so confusing. Like, I think that Sifo Dyas should have been Qui-Gon Jinn.
Okay.
I think he should have been there, because I think that pulling Sifo Dyas out of thin air makes no sense, especially when he's never mentioned on screen before, he's never shown on screen before. It's just like, here's just someone who we don't know. And having it be Qui-Gon Jinn, I think would have created a more challenging emotional arc for Obi-Wan in this movie, and would give him a little bit more to do than just be a detective. Because I think if he realized, oh, my master asked for the creation of this clone army, why did he do that? And why did he keep the secret from the council? And what was his intentions? What was going on that I didn't know about my master? And I think that would have made him question his own allegiances, question the council, and maybe he even could have tried to commune with Qui-Gon Jinn through the Force, and that could have been cool. I know that we got that eventually in the Obi-Wan series, but you know, I think that could have elevated his character arc in this movie. Yeah, because I mean, Obi-Wan's a great character, but yeah, he doesn't change a lot from start to end. He's just really a detective for the most part, and he's just carrying the entire story. But I think what's also makes this confusing too of Sifo Dyas is the introduction of Count Dooku too. So it's like, is Sifo Dyas Count Dooku? Like you were just saying with Darth Tyrannus, like, and he's mentioned earlier in the movie, you introduced 2 new names in this movie. As a child, you're going to be asking a lot of questions and being like, is Sifo Dyas Tyrannus? Is he Count Dooku? Is he Qui-Gon Jinn? It's just maddeningly confusing.
Yeah. And I'm actually going to circle back to that point in a minute, but I want to talk about first on this viewing, what I noticed about Obi-Wan's storyline is like, his entire subplot is clearly meant to be a play on the detective noir genre. And I actually don't hate that. Like, think about it. He's drinking at the nightclub and is telling off a drug dealer in one scene. He has this old contact at a 1950s diner that he goes to who knows stuff about this shady underworld dart weapon. The heavy raining on Kamino is very noir feeling.
Yeah.
Investigating an assassination attempt that leads to this broader government conspiracy.
Why do I get the feeling you're going to be the death of me? Go and find her. Where are you going, Master? For a drink. Do you know who it was you were trying to kill?
It was a senator from Naboo.
And who hired you?
Just a job.
I hate to say it, but it looks like the system you're searching for doesn't exist.
What do you know? What you got here is a Kamino saber dart. These are Kamino weapons. Keep to themselves.
Are they friendly?
Oh, it depends.
Depends on what, Dex?
On how good your manners are. How big your pocketbook is.
The senator from Naboo. Is she dead yet? I'm not signing your treaty until I have her head on my desk.
I mean, the mystery itself is dumb as hell, and it makes Obi-Wan look incredibly stupid. Because, like, oh, you're looking for the attempted assassin of the chief senator opposed to the Military Creation Act, and your investigation leads you to a surprise military for the Republic that was commissioned by someone, and you just decide to never follow up on that? Or think of any connections that might... Come on, Ben! Come on, buddy!
You're almost there.
Yeah, you're so close. And it's like... This is another thing where, I understand the Jedi are meant to be, like, kind of cult and have lost their way, but this specifically makes them out to be incredibly stupid. They're just, like, fine with it. They're like, all right, let's go to war.
I guess we'll take the army, thank you.
And then Yoda is like, oh, it's bad that the Clone War started. It's like, bitch, you brought the army. You did this. But I also think Obi-Wan's duel with Jango Fett is a pretty fun sequence, and it is a different type of fight than we're used to seeing, because it's a lightsaber, using force wielder versus a bounty hunter with like a jetpack and guns, and there's a lot of like kicking and punching, and I think that's really fun. I love the funny moment where Obi-Wan kicks Jango Fett when they're tied up, and he's like,
"That's good." He's like, "Oh shit."
Yeah, it's good. It's a fun action sequence.
Yes, I agree. It's a good one.
But circling back to your point on Dooku, this may be controversial for some people. In full respect to the late great Sir Christopher Lee, but Count Dooku sucks, and he should have just been Qui-Gon Jinn. I will elaborate on this. So Dooku is almost interesting when he's first introduced, because he is rightfully calling out the Republic's corruption and identifying that it has been taken over by dark forces, Darth Sidious, right? But the idea of the trilogy's villain being genuinely opposed to evil at the heart of this institution, opposed to Palpatine's corruption, is actually very interesting. And then it's immediately undermined because Dooku is working for Palpatine, and he knows who Palpatine is, and he's just a Sith Lord. So here's why it should have been Qui-Gon. Like I said earlier, in Revenge of the Sith, the Crawl says there are heroes on both sides. Objectively false. Not true. Qui-Gon should have been in the Dooku role because Dooku is like the president of the Separatists, at least in the Clone Wars. You would have to change a couple more things. I'm going to get to that. But Qui-Gon could be our hero on the other side, right? Have it so he's not working for Sidious knowingly, but like he's getting visions from the Force that show this dark force at the center of the Republic. And he's like, I have to fight back against this, even if it means you know, going back on some of my values or whatever. How is Qui-Gon alive? I don't know. It doesn't matter.
You can figure it out, George.
Heroes on both sides. There we go. And then also, in episode 2, this would actually give Obi-Wan and us some temptation. When Obi-Wan is captured in the little like prison thingy, to like, you might feel something and feel some temptation from the change sides. As is, the scene doesn't work because we don't have an emotional connection to Dooku. He's Qui-Gon's master. Okay. So some guy is telling Obi-Wan to change sides. Join me. It doesn't work. But if it was Qui-Gon, there's a question there. And then it gives you good cause for Obi-Wan to start becoming more distant from Anakin in episode 3 after Anakin kills Qui-Gon instead of Dooku, because Obi-Wan obviously has a huge attachment to Qui-Gon. So maybe you show this across episodes 2 and 3, like in episode 2, Anakin is getting dreams about his mother, and maybe you have Obi-Wan like going to the council. It's like, hey, can we like go get her? Anakin's like, this is worrisome. Like he's having these visions. We should go help his mom. And they say no.
Mm-hmm.
It's like drawing a distinction between Obi-Wan and the council. Like Obi-Wan really wants help. And then in episode 3, after Qui-Gon has been killed by Anakin, Anakin starts getting visions of Padme's death, and maybe Obi-Wan doesn't really help him, or doesn't give him that attention this time, and that causes Anakin to start kind of resenting Obi-Wan a little bit. Maybe you even have Obi-Wan take the Grievous assignment on his own. He requests to go on his own so he can like have some space, you know? And then that leaves Anakin alone with Palpatine at his most vulnerable.
I like that.
And I think it does so much more if you just have it be Qui-Gon instead of Dooku, because Dooku is nothing. He's the most nothing character in all of Star Wars.
We don't get any background information on him in any of these movies, besides just like, oh yeah, he was a Jedi and now he's got different views, and that's it.
Yeah.
You know, like
right. And again, what are the views? He's a Sith now. That's the view.
Yeah, like they don't elaborate.
Yeah, but that's not interesting. I don't know. That's my soapbox.
I like that interpretation, and I think that would have made the prequels far more interesting, because then you could show both sides. Right. It's not just the Republic are the good guys, and we're facing the bad guys because they don't want to be part of our system of government, you know?
Well, and remembering that these movies are for children, and you enjoy, if you're George, you want those children, your primary audience, to be questioning the Jedi and the Republic and the validity of these institutions. But in execution, if you show us on the one side, Obi-Wan, friend, we love Obi-Wan from the old movies, and then on the other side, guy who wants to kill Natalie Portman and no one else, we're just going to side with Obi-Wan.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't, having this be Qui-Gon over here, at least would prime the audience. Well, we liked Qui-Gon in the first one. Why is he doing this? Like, it would spark questions in your young mind.
Absolutely. Well, it would have been a more nuanced story. So I like that read. I'll also say on this rewatch too of Attack of the Clones, I got surprisingly emotional about Shmi Skywalker's death this time around. I'm not sure why. I think it's me growing up a little bit, and this was, you know, it's one of the few scenes in the movie that has actual emotion, and it's not stilted dialogue. Like, Hayden's giving a good performance in that scene. Like, you can feel that he's upset about this, and I don't know the actress's name, but she's doing a good job too in that scene. But I think it's also just because I'm a little bit older now, and I'm like, I can connect with the emotions of it more because I'm a lot more aware of my own mortality, and those around me too, much more than I was as a child. I think I'm just more aware of how difficult Shmi Skywalker's life was, and how much the Skywalker life, like how terrible it was in general for both her and her son, because, you know, he was born into slavery. She's been a slave like her whole life. It's incredibly horrible. And then can you imagine being a slave for so long? You birth a kid into slavery. You have to raise that kid on your own. You lose them to a cult, you know, and then you're bought and sold. You get your freedom back, and then you get kidnapped and tortured and die. It got to me this time.
Yeah.
I sympathize with her character.
And I'm not gonna say we need to unpack this because I don't think the film wants us to, but like the idea of freeing someone from slavery and marrying them, there's a power dynamic there that makes that very inappropriate, but you know, we can move past it.
We don't need to dive into that as much because there's a lot of weird dynamics in Star Wars with the droids too. we'll skip right over that.
Oh, yeah.
Moving to another dark note, I also feel conflicted about Anakin's character in this movie. When he kills the Tusken Raiders, genocide is unjustifiable. You can't justify it, period. No matter how violent the other side has been to you or your people, violence only begets more violence and more death and conflict. And just being like, oh, they killed my mom, so I can just kill all of them. That's not an appropriate reaction. When he genocides an entire village and a native species like that, it's tough to redeem his character after that. And I don't care if he's the chosen one. If Jesus went back and killed the Romans after rising again, he wouldn't be revered today as the Messiah, and it would go against everything he ever preached. And if he's Space Jesus wouldn't do that.
Space Jesus would be very chill.
Space Jesus would turn the other cheek and say, all right, I'm gonna bring the body back. Anakin, he doesn't do a lot to make up for that mistake in this movie, you know?
He does nothing.
He doesn't do it. Yeah, he doesn't do anything. He confesses his what he did to Padme, and as far as I know, he never tells Obi-Wan or Yoda about the massacres. No one ever knows. Yoda senses that he's in pain, but Yoda doesn't do shit about it.
Again, something that no one bothers to follow up on. Like, did you not talk about whatever this pain was?
Yeah, he's not like, oh, I should ask Anakin what's going on when I see him next. So yeah, what are the consequences for Anakin's actions? None. And how does George make us like this character again? He doesn't. Anakin continues to just be arrogant and spiteful and childish for the rest of the movie, and he's just kind of driven by his personal emotions. He doesn't listen to instructions from his master. It's just tough for me to connect with him after he kills the Tuskens. It was tough to connect earlier with him too, just from the get-go, but like watching it today, I'm like, you get everything, you deserve everything that's coming to you with your arm getting cut off. Like,
well, I think what's going on is most people probably expected the fall of Anakin Skywalker to be about a good, noble person who succumbs to temptation and turns evil. But what George decided to do instead is he wrote Anakin as a troubled kid, a very troubled kid who is in danger of falling to darkness from the start. And I think the point he's trying to go for is that if the Jedi as an institution were more well-equipped and maybe not so emotionally closed off, they could have helped him and guided him through this. But instead, their advice is completely useless to someone in Anakin's situation, and in his darkest moments, he doesn't have anyone in that organization to turn to that he can trust. I think that's part of the point of it, and I don't think George is letting Anakin off the hook for his own decisions, but I think that is a big part of the trilogy, is that the systemic failures let this guy down. They brought him into their orbit, and they did not provide him with the resources necessary to be the person he could have been. But, and this is also, though, like, one of the things about Padme in these movies that I don't like is she's just a fucking enabler to his violence, too. Like, he comes back and he gives this, like, really creepy rant about mass murder, and she's like, to be angry is to be human. Girl, run.
Yeah, he's grappling with loss, but, dude...
Leave him and run.
Get out of there. He's gonna kill you, honey. On a kind of speaking about Padme, why is Jar Jar qualified to be in the Senate?
Well, he's a representative of the Gungan people, and he's like on their little entourage. But I mean,
he has like no political experience. There were so many other people that I'm like, I immediately thought of, like, even the guy with the white beard. I'm like, why is that guy not here?
He's there because he's one of the main characters from the last movie. That's the thing.
But like, why is he not taking Padme's spot in the Senate? You know, why not anybody else?
I don't know.
I know that for the purpose of the story, it was so that they had someone in the Senate who could grant emergency powers to the Chancellor. It wouldn't...
Jar Jar, no!
Padme, tag him in, you know, and then he just fucks everything up. But yeah, why was he even qualified? There should have been another short list of like 10 different people that the Queen had in mind to be senator.
Interestingly, another thing is there were no real guys or clone trooper suits in this movie at all.
This one too.
In this one, yeah. Well, there might be in the next one, but there are not in this one. Rob Coleman, who was, I think, a visual effects supervisor, he said in an article for Clones at 20, he said, my memory was, it was George. He just threw the gauntlet down and said, no real guys in costumes. And I don't know why. I think part of it was to give us a high bar to go over. I think probably it was a cost thing too, like how many costumes will they make and how many extras will they have. And the reality of having extras wouldn't be all exactly the same height and proportions. The whole idea was this clone army, so they're all the same.
I see the reasoning there.
I do see that reasoning. And also another bit of trivia, this was the first Star Wars film to have the CGI Yoda.
Yeah, I remember that very clearly.
And the CGI model would later be inserted into the Phantom Menace in subsequent re-releases because no one really liked that Phantom Menace puppet they used. It looks weird. Yeah, some other miscellaneous trivia too. The clone troopers apparently always move from screen right to screen left, and the droids always move from screen left to screen right, and that was to help the audience visually keep track of who's who in those big battle sequences. Another is that Ewan McGregor had a wig and a fake beard in some scenes because he had to go film Black Hawk Down after principal photography, and he didn't have time to regrow his hair from that because he had like a buzz cut and was clean shaven for that because it's a military movie. Niles, do you have any final thoughts on Attack of the Clones?
I think we covered it. Yeah, I think we covered it. It could have been a lot better than what it was, but I think my nostalgia, I still appreciate a lot of it. You know, it's mainly the parts that are not the romance. Yeah.
I do really love the ending here with the Star Destroyers flying off into the sky, just showing us that how the Empire, even though it isn't called that yet, it's being born right now. Like the threshold has been crossed. Palpatine's plan is coming together. And I do ultimately think like the film has a couple bright spots, but I think it fails at both developing Obi-Wan and Anakin's friendship on screen together, and it fails at developing the romance between Anakin and Padme because it just doesn't click. And I think those were the film's most important jobs. And yeah, there are just a bunch of like weird, dumb things in it that don't make sense too. But that's whatever, you know.
That's Attack of the Clones.
That's Attack of the Clones. Clones, attack.
But let's round it out now.
All right, and our final film of the video, we were talking about Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. This is where it all culminates with the downfall of the Republic and Anakin Skywalker, leading to the birth of the Empire under the stewardship of Emperor Palpatine and the newly christened Darth Vader. The tragedy of the trilogy. Initial thoughts. Niles, what you got?
For me, I think this is the best prequel, released in 2005, and, you know, I think it's the most refined, the most quotable.
It's the most memed first.
Yes, it's the most memed. I just love it. Yeah, when we watched it, I was just like, yeah, I think that it is the only prequel that I will go back and rewatch.
Okay.
More frequently than Attack of the Clones and Phantom Menace. But what are your overall thoughts on?
Yeah, so I agree. I do think this is the best of the three, and I was actually having a pretty good time. We rewatched this one together. We did the other two separately, but I was having a really good time rewatching this until Anakin makes the turn to Vader. There are still a handful of enjoyable moments past that point, but the movie feels like it is increasingly becoming contrivance after contrivance just to get things to exactly how they were in A New Hope. Yoda running away from his duel and just going straight to Dagobah. Padme dying. Luke and Leia being delivered to their new homes. Entire droid armies just vanishing, like on Kashyyyk. After Order 66, droids are gone. Where'd they go? It's like the blockade in the first film. Now they're just gone again. The Death Star is getting built, and to a lesser extent, Vader getting put in the full suit. Here's a question for you. Would it have been more interesting if it's just implied that he ended up in that suit over time? Like, he doesn't have to be totally in there by the end of the movie. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit too, but I think that's my biggest annoyance with this movie, is it's just obsessed with making sure everything is exactly how the fans remembered it from the start of the original movie. And I think we could have left room for things to have happened in between.
Yeah.
But also, I've seen how Star Wars fans are, and if anything is left to the imagination, they will demand that it is explained to them in a film or a TV show. So maybe George was ahead of the game.
Maybe.
Just like, I want to be done, shut the fuck up, everything is exactly how you expect it to be. So what do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree, because I think, at the time, that he probably wasn't anticipating that there'd be hundreds of, extra hours of footage for Star Wars that can explain a lot of the things and fill in gaps. Yeah, one of the things that is not great about this movie is it tries to wrap up everything too nicely with a nice bow for continuity's sake. And yeah, I think I agree that George could have left some things a little bit more looser there. Like, yeah, we didn't need to see Anakin be put back in the suit. I think it could have been nice to just leave it like the final scene between Palpatine and Anakin is just him discovering Anakin on Mustafar, you know, all burnt up and stuff. It's like, that could have been it for those two characters.
I don't think he even needs to be fully burnt up in this movie.
Padme also, did she really need to die in this movie? Did she really need to die to the end?
Talk about that more later on too, but I don't think she should have died. That's my hot take.
Yeah, just everything didn't need to be put back in place for the sake of Kanan. It's not like, you know, you need to get all your toys back into the box and get ready, or just so that you can start playtime again. It's like, yeah, you can leave some things out, you know? But I do think that there's a lot of beautiful things in this movie, like that opening shot of the space battle.
That's great.
That is just phenomenal, breathtaking, and I think you said it when we were watching it, that it really puts things into scale of like how vast these wars are, a Star War.
Yes, we'll talk about it next year when we do the sequels, but I overall like the sequel trilogy, the first two, but the one critique I have of even the ones I like is that the scale is not there. It feels like a small conflict instead of a galaxy spanning thing, which the originals feel like at times too, but this feels like everyone's here. Everyone's involved. It's huge.
I do like all the stuff of like the clones actually in battle. That first like 30 minutes of the film rescuing the Chancellor, that's cool. I think it goes on for a little too long, but it's cool. And I like all the action, everything in the space. I like all that stuff's cool. I like all the stuff on the Utapau system. The aesthetics of the clones, and just like, even though that they're all CGI and Ewan McGregor's the only live thing on screen, all their tech and stuff is just cool. And the new droid designs are cool in this movie too, that they introduced, like the Buzz droids I thought were neat.
Okay.
And then the Magna Guards are cool too, but then they don't apply the logic consistently to them throughout the movie too, where it's like Obi-Wan cuts one's head off like at the start of the movie and it keeps fighting him, and then he does it again later in the film and it dies immediately. It's like, okay, so there's not a lot of consistency there, but I like the introduction of those new designs.
On the note of the opening sequence too, I think the visual shots paralleling Return of the Jedi when Anakin is fighting Dooku, I think they work pretty well visually, like somewhat. It's shot very similarly to the Luke Vader fight when they're going across the screen fighting each other, and you also have Palpatine in the throne egging on the hero of the scene to kill their opponent. Where Anakin fails and does the wrong thing, Luke succeeds and defies Palpatine and throws down his weapon. However, it feels inappropriately placed in the film, and the visual parallel to the throne room is like used too early. Like, the sequence centers around the point where Anakin goes too far and he kills an unarmed and defenseless Dooku, right? Based on the visual parallel to Return of the Jedi, he's Vader now.
Yes.
He was given the choice and he made the wrong one. Luke made the right one. But the film doesn't treat it that way. No one seems upset about what Anakin did. No one really questions it. Anakin himself is just like, shouldn't have done that. Another thing that bothers me about this scene, it's a nitpick, but when Obi-Wan gets knocked out, Dooku throws the thing down on him. It's like, it's a heavy thing. It would have crushed his legs, and he's not injured at all. It doesn't, nitpick doesn't matter.
It just pins him, but yeah, it should have broke his legs.
On another note, though, I was both really surprised and disappointed by just how passive Padme is in this film. She's such a much more active and assertive character in the first two, and it makes me so mad that she just loses the will to live in this one. Like, come on, you just birthed two kids who need you, and the galaxy could probably use your leadership. You seem to know what's going on a lot of the time. Get your shit together, Padme. And the Padme of the first two films would not have died of a fucking broken heart. That's what I'll say. It's bullshit. It's bad writing. This is straight up bad writing. There are no excuses for it. It's just dumb.
I agree 100%. Like, as a kid, I did not think about it that critically, and I'm disappointed in her character because she has no agency in this movie at all. Her whole purpose in Revenge of the Sith is just to give birth to kids. And that's it. She has no other role, but it pisses me off as an adult. As a kid, I was like, oh yeah, like, this is fine.
She's also just not in the movie very much.
Yeah, she's just in that apartment or on Mustafar, and that's kind of it. And then maybe one time in the Senate, but that's like it. And she does nothing except just be pregnant and give birth and die. She had stuff to do in the last two movies. She was part of the three main characters, and in this movie it's just two main characters, really. She's giving nothing to do. Like, she could have still been involved in the Senate a little bit more. Like, she could have been in there and, worked with Jimmy Schmidt's, or
Bail Organa.
Bail Organa, thank you, with his character to, jumpstart the rebellion more proactively with the other rebels. Mon Mothma's in there. It's like, come on, give Padme something to do.
Mon Mothma is only in the deleted scenes, and in the deleted scenes, that is what Padme is doing.
We have decided to do what we can to stop it. Senator Mon Mothma and I are putting together an organization.
Say no more, Senator, I understand. At this point, some things are better left unsaid.
Agreed.
And it feels like it comes out of nowhere in the theatrical cut where Padme's like, you ever think we're on the wrong side? That is supposed to be building off of in a deleted scene when she's meeting with Bail Organa and Mon Mothma and some other senators, and they're laying the seeds for what eventually becomes the rebellion there. And apparently she, at some point in the story development, was going to try to stab and kill Anakin on Mustafar after she realized what he'd done, but that was all cut. I do like one thing she says in this, and it's when Palpatine is like doing his spiel in the Senate, and then she's like, this is how liberty dies, to thunderous applause. Like, that's
one of the best lines.
One of the best lines in the whole movie. And she's saying it to Bail Organa. And speaking of Bail Organa, I have another thing to say, but first, here's a little, question. Should Naboo, and I go back and forth on this, should Naboo have been Alderaan? On the one hand, it makes the universe smaller, and we don't want that. But on the other hand, it would have given us as an audience a chance to really get to know Alderaan as a place and feel an emotional connection to it through these three movies, which would add something to the original film, because now it's not just Leia losing a planet, we're losing it too.
I like that idea as having it be Alderaan, because then, yeah, you're right. Would have made us care more about that event of it being blown up in the fourth movie. It would have added more emotion to that scene, recontextualized it a little bit more.
And that's what good prequels are supposed to do. They're supposed to add context and recontextualize some things you understand from the original, which is why a prequel like X-Men First Class. X-Men First Class is a great prequel. You're always told that how Professor X and Magneto used to be friends, and now you get to see it, and you get to see how that friendship fell apart, and it's satisfying and has some unexpected turns along the way. Alderaan is another addition to the very strange politics of the Star Wars universe, because Bail Organa is a senator, but Princess Leia is a princess, and she's the adopted daughter of Bail Organa, so at some point he becomes the king?
Wow, good point. I never thought about that. But, yeah, do they elect their leaders? Yeah, that's this is wow. Okay.
But they're both peaceful planets who have no weapons, which is interesting. So maybe at a certain point Naboo was meant to be Alderaan, and they changed their minds. But here's the thought experiment for you. What if Padme doesn't realize she's pregnant until later in the movie? And maybe she finds out just before Anakin turns. So when she thinks Anakin is being killed in the Jedi Temple and she's all sad, it's because she just realized that she's going to have his kid, and she's sad about that. And then it makes it even more sad when she finds out that he was killing Jedi, specifically the children. And it would give her the opportunity to be more proactive in the narrative, because she's not just hiding the pregnancy the whole time, which is what she's doing in the movie. And you might ask yourself, well, why would Anakin be having dreams about her dying in childbirth if she didn't know she was pregnant? It's like, he can just be having dreams about her dying.
Yeah.
He didn't know why his mom was dying, and he was just having some fucking dreams.
Yeah, we didn't see them. Yeah, it was very different. Well, I think that's a good idea, though, because then you could also play with, when does Anakin learn about the kids?
Maybe he doesn't.
Yeah, at the end of this movie, he doesn't ask about the kids at all. He's just like, is Padme alive? And it's like, oh, she's dead. And he doesn't follow up. No! Yeah. It's like, he doesn't give a shit about his kids.
Yeah.
It's like, that's...
Well, and like you said earlier, Padme does not have to die in this film. And if she doesn't find out about her pregnancy until later, you wouldn't be able to kill her in the timeline of this movie. I think Padme, and honestly Obi-Wan, would be involved in the early days of the rebellion.
I think so.
Yes, eventually Obi-Wan has to go watch over Luke, and that's his fucking assignment or whatever for the hope. But it's like, these are proactive people. They wouldn't just die or sit and do nothing for 2 decades.
Yeah.
While other people are out there doing shit. So it's just like, it's a misuse of the characters, I think. But speaking of Padme, the scene in this movie where Padme and Anakin are looking across the city at each other is the best scene in the movie and maybe even the trilogy. The only thing that drags it down is the voice playing in Anakin's head of what Palpatine said earlier, because it's like, we don't need it. We know.
Yeah.
Because Hayden Christensen and Natalie Portman are actually doing a very good job in this scene, and it is a rare moment of subtlety in this trilogy. It's the best fucking moment in the whole thing by far. It's so good.
Yeah, that scene is beautiful.
Yeah, I do kind of like the scene where Palpatine's just like, I'm the fucking Sith Lord, dude. It's me.
Yeah, he's just like, all right, I gotta come out now. This is my big reveal.
Now let's talk about General Grievous.
Yeah, very, very quickly. I like General Grievous's design as a character, especially when I was a kid. I thought that the way he looked is just really cool. You know, just a cyborg creature, like his character design is objectively cool in my opinion, and I hold by that to this day. However, I think he's just a bad character.
Yeah, he's not great.
And I really think that he should have just been like something else, like Darth Maul resurrected. You know, they did that in the Clone Wars series, you know, where they bring back Darth Maul and he's filled with hate and he's got cyborg legs. And it's like, if you want to lean into the cyborg angle, which I know that George was kind of trying to do with the foreshadowing Darth.
Apparently each villain was supposed to be an aspect of Vader.
Darth Maul's supposed to be the hate. Count Dooku's supposed to be a fallen Jedi. And Grievous is supposed to be the mechanical nature, you know, because he's more machine now than man.
Is Darth Maul hate? So I didn't mention this in the Phantom Menace.
We don't know anything about Darth Maul.
Yeah, Darth Maul, like, I hate that people say Darth Maul is such a cool character in the Phantom Menace, because he's not. Darth Maul is a cool character in the Clone Wars animated series. Darth Maul is not a character in the Phantom Menace. He just looks cool.
Yeah, he says 2 lines, and that's it.
Yeah, he's not a cool character. He doesn't do anything. Yeah, he looks cool, and you were deceived.
We don't understand his motivation, what his background is, or anything like that. We just know he looks cool. So, like, bringing him back in this way at this time as General Grievous would have made sense.
Yeah.
In my opinion. But you know, General Grievous is honestly kind of a lost cause in some respects. As a kid, you know, if you didn't watch the 2D animation before you went and saw this movie, you're like, why is he coughing the whole time? Like, it's so confusing because he's a character in a diminished state, you know, where he's not at his full capacity and as threatening and as imposing as he was during this during the Clone Wars. As a viewer, you shouldn't have to watch all this extra bullshit when the movies are the main source of content. You need to explain things to kids.
Yes, because as a viewer, you may also be asking yourself, who is this person?
Yeah. What is the significance of this general, and why is he Grievous?
Yes, General Grievous as a character, also, like Dooku, kind of sucks. And in my opinion, he only exists so that there is someone for Obi-Wan Kenobi to lightsaber fight halfway through the movie.
Hello there.
I have also just never bought into the idea of him being a threat to the Jedi in any way. He cannot use the Force. He just swings swords around. Just use your mind and rip his hands off and then tie him down and he's done. He can't do anything. Just use your brain, your mind, your Force powers, your magic. You're a wizard.
The Force Crush thing, just do it.
And introducing him as this hunched over robot, inexplicably coughing constantly and running away from fights, just is an odd way to intro a guy who's meant to be a threat. Like in the fight on the bridge, what was he thinking? You know that these people can move things with your mind. You're like, I'm gonna put your lightsabers right here where you can see them alongside a bunch of other lightsabers that also just, they would fall out. They would fall out. The pockets are too small. General Grievous. Get bigger pockets, you dumbass.
Your stupid cloak.
Stupid fucking.
And why did you bring them to the bridge?
Yes, and then it's like they start fighting the Magna Guards, and then he just walks away.
This would be an opportune time to kill them.
The scene is shot in a way where it never shows you where he went or what he's doing, and then he breaks the window and runs away, which. I like the character quirk of, like, the droid general just being a complete fucking coward if there was another, like, Vader type in charge of him. But he's the Vader type for this movie, and he just runs away. This ties into a larger thing with the droid armies. They're all useless. I think the intention is, like, they're weak, but they make up for it in numbers, but that's never really felt. Because they cut through them like butter, in George's own words, all the time. Even the super battle droids, which, like, while I do like that moment where Obi-Wan is like, and then it's easily cuts. It's like those ones should have been a threat, like hard to deal with, because it makes it so the main characters are never in real danger. And it also makes it feel even dumber when Jedi are taken out by these things, because we're shown how ineffective they are all the time. And then, like, in the Geonosis battle, like, 35 Jedi get killed by them. Come on, be better.
Yeah, I agree. They don't add tension to the scene. If you can just cut through them so easily. You had 100 guns pointed at you in the elevator, and then you just killed them all.
Yeah, they may as well not be there.
Yeah. Separatists in general are, like, confusing, too. At this point, I don't understand why any of the Separatists are listening to the instructions of Lord Sidious anymore. Yeah. And I know that they're coming through General Grievous, and he's like, I'm going to send you to the Mustafar planet to protect you, and you'll be safe there. And it's like, they keep losing and losing, and every time he gives them advice or asks them to do something, it backfires.
Yes.
No, like, invade Naboo, sure thing. Oh, that didn't go well. Like,
I went to jail and I did not help you.
yeah, like he didn't do anything for them. And it's like, I guess they don't have a lot of options. Republic is chasing you. You gotta you gotta trust the person who's giving you support, I guess. But like, you can tell you're losing and you just agree to this remote volcanic planet. You trust Sidious when he's like, I'm gonna send my third apprentice to help you guys out my third apprentice in the last 10 years. He's gonna protect you.
Yeah.
It's like, you guys are morons. Like,
well, and again, like, what has he promised them?
I know.
Because he can't promise them political shit, because then it would reveal he's Palpatine, and they don't know he's Palpatine. Dooku's the only one who knows. What is he promising them, like gold?
More trade. Yeah. I have no idea. Why do they trust him? Yeah, they're confusing. Anakin's character's also confusing. He's just poorly written, in my opinion. And, Hayden Christensen, he's doing the best he can with this script. I just can't believe how this character acts in this movie. It's just like, it throws all logic out the window, and everything he's learned in his life, it just he just ignores it. Because I understand his main motivation, returning to the dark side in this movie, is spelled out. It's to save Padme's life. There's also some other things in there of like, oh, I'm just continuously frustrated with the council. That comes across. So that's fine. That totally works. All that just ultimately makes him decide to save Palpatine in the moment from being executed by Mace Windu and turn his back on the entire Jedi Order. It's just like a light switch flips in his head in that moment, and all of a sudden he's all into the dark side. He doesn't even consider the lives lost or anything like that, or the fact that he's gonna have to go kill all these Jedi. He's just like, yeah, I'm in, Sidious, whatever you want me to do. The Jedi betrayed us. I'm all in at this point. And so it's just infuriating to me. The movie's saying very hard at this moment, he is officially Darth Vader here. We're literally giving him a new name, and the switch, but I don't know. It's been a very gradual process for him.
Yeah, and I think that's meant to be what it is. It's like he's already been primed for all this stuff, and this is just the final moment. One thing I do like about the sequence leading up to his turn, I've just always found it very funny. He's like running after Windu and them, and he runs into the Chancellor's office, and then very abruptly stops and cuts his pace and just starts walking. So it's so funny.
No more urgency now.
He crosses into the office, like, oh, gotta observe this decorum. Vader just immediately being along for the ride with everything Palpatine says feels odd. Like, he should at least express some confusion over why Palpatine knows exactly where all the Separatist leaders are. Now, maybe we're meant to understand that he knew that the Sith Lord they were looking for was puppeteering both sides, and he's just like, okay, I get the picture now, I'm on board, maybe, but it doesn't really come through that way for me. But I find this film, specifically regarding Vader, very odd and hard to reconcile with George's mantra of these films being made for children. They are, but this one certainly less so than all of the other ones. Yeah. We see Anakin in great detail burned to a crisp by lava. I don't know if you needed to include that in your children's movie. It doesn't seem necessary. I remember my grandmother, we were sitting at the pool at my grandparents' house, and she pulled up a newspaper with an op-ed titled, "Don't Take Your Children to See Star Wars," leading up to this movie, and I was very upset with her. I was like, you put that down. I'm going to see this. This is very important to me. And on 60 Minutes, George advised parents not bring their younger children to see Revenge of the Sith, telling Leslie Stahl that Sith is much more dark, more emotional. He adds, I don't think I would take a 5 or 6-year-old to see this, according to Entertainment Weekly, the Chicago Tribune, I think. The intensity of those sequences makes for some incongruous tie-ins this time around for the franchise that practically invented Hollywood toy and product synergy. The gruesome scene on the lava planet, that's the inspiration behind Darth Vader's face on the new boxes of Lava Berry Explosion Pop-Tarts and Keebler's Lava Strips Fudge Cookies. Nowhere is Sith more visible than in the toy aisles, thanks to an array of new playthings and games from the Rhode Island-based Hasbro Inc. Toys. Brian Goldner, who oversees the company's U.S. line of toys, said on the sale of Sith toys to very young children does not send the message that Sith is a movie for them to see. I think that's very interesting. Merchandising has been a part of Star Wars since the beginning, as we talked about in our last video, but it is very interesting that this movie goes so dark in so many ways. And like a lot of the violence is off screen, it's perfectly suitable to watch as a kid, we did. But it is the first Star Wars movie to be PG-13.
It is a little bit more gruesome, it's a little more dark.
And speaking of children, specifically killing them, let's talk about Order 66.
Great transition. Yeah, Order 66 in this movie is, a few things popped out to me this time around. I mean, it's a cool sequence, I think, overall. I just don't think it's it's strong enough as an emotional beat in the movie. Like, yes, you can add sad music into it, show a lot of these very violent deaths of like people being exploded and shot, but like at the same time, we never got to know any of these Jedi. The only Jedi we've ever gotten to develop any kind of emotional bond with have been Anakin and Obi-Wan, and maybe a little bit Yoda, but that's just more of the OG nostalgia.
It's more just, yeah.
It's really just been Anakin and Obi-Wan.
And I guess Mace Windu, but he's just kind of a dick.
He has done nothing.
He does nothing.
Except tell everyone no, you know?
I sense a plot to destroy the Jedi. Well, Mace, maybe fucking do something. You say this over and over again, and you do nothing.
Yeah, he does nothing in these movies, and so like, all these Jedi being gunned down and killed, it's like, oh, Yoda's emotional about it, but I feel nothing. Yes, this is kind of sad, but at the same time, it is the hubris of the Jedi. We've talked about this. Yeah. You know, you guys kind of made this problem for yourselves.
Right. I would also argue that I felt both Yoda reacts by like dropping his little staff and he's sad for a moment, but I think Obi-Wan and Yoda both take this a little too well. They should be more upset. They should react and emote more. Like, you should see cracks in their philosophy here about detachment and rejoicing. Like, this should be a test of Yoda's resolve, because earlier in the film he tells Anakin, train yourself to like let go of all you fear to lose. Yes. And then in this moment we should see Yoda unable to do this.
Yes.
Because it's too much. And even like Obi-Wan realizing that it was Anakin, come on, Ewan, you give me a bit more. That's like one of his weakest moments in the trilogy, I think, is him watching. It's like, it can't be.
It can't be. It can't be.
Like, he's not looking at anything, you know, like as an actor.
Right.
But so I understand it's difficult for him, but yeah, I agree. It should have been more emotionally impactful there.
Right. And I've said it before, I think on video for our show, but Order 66 is more effective in every subsequent piece of media where it appears. Why? Because all of those pieces of media have done the groundwork to make us care about the characters we're losing in it. In Jedi Fallen Order, we see Order 66 with Cal as a kid and where his master dies protecting him. We have built up through flashbacks. It's like, that's how you gain new Force abilities in that building. It's like Cal remembering his master teach them. Yeah. And so you have flashbacks throughout the game. And so like there's that. There's in the Clone Wars animated series at the end is probably the best example of it, right? Because the work has been done, especially in Clone Wars, where the work has also been done to make you care about the clones who are doing the mass killing. Yes. It's devastating. In this, it's just the sequence on paper works fantastically, but I don't give a fuck about Ki-Adi-Mundi or Plo Koon or the other ones.
Yeah, the other nameless Jedi who were gunned down, who have names, but they were never talked about or featured on screen before, so I'm never going to learn them. I think visually it looks really good, but yeah, it could have been stronger than what it was. I also think that in this movie, because we're talking a lot about performances, Ian McDiarmid gave probably, I think, the best He's a standout performance in this movie.
Yes.
Just the way he delivers lines is exceptional.
He chews scenery. He's great.
Yeah, he's the best part, and he just shows strong facial expressions, especially when he turns.
Yes. When he unleashes.
He's just like, okay, the jig is up, and now I can be Lord Sidious crazy.
He's having a great time. I love when Yoda pushes him over in the chair. It's very funny. I still think them fighting is bad. Neither of them should be fighting at all, and their fight sucks, but that part is pretty funny. Speaking of McDermott as Palpatine, though, I want to talk about the opera scene. An overall pretty solid scene, other than Anakin
memeable
taking the bait to such an embarrassing degree. But most importantly, though, I want to talk about Darth Sidious. Or not Darth Sidious, Darth Plagueis. I am confused by Star Wars fans on this one, because as a kid, and even today, I have always thought the intent for this scene was that there never was a Plagueis. He's not real. There never even was a legend of Darth Plagueis. This is just some bullshit that Palpatine made up. And I think that's more interesting. He knows that Anakin is worried about Padme dying. Probably because he is planting those memories in some way, or is having some influence on them, right?
Yeah.
And he knows he can manipulate Anakin with that. Because how convenient that the exact thing that Anakin's worried about is what Plagueis was able to do. Plagueis never existed, which is why I was always baffled by, like, what if this new Supreme Leader Snoke guy, what if he's Darth Plagueis? Why the fuck do you want that?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's more interesting this way. Another little hypothetical thing here. What if, you remember at the end of the Phantom Menace when Mace Windu and Yoda are talking and they're like, always two, master and an apprentice. And Mace Windu's like, but which was slain, the master or the apprentice? And it cuts to Palpatine. It's actually a very good...
That is a good shot. Yeah.
I love it.
That is a good part.
Actually, on that real quick. As a kid, you always knew Palpatine was Sidious, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I did too. Probably through a toy or something, but like, the Emperor is not named Palpatine in the original trilogy at all. So we knew that from a video game or a book or a toy or something.
Somehow.
But I thought it was very interesting when I was abroad. I was showing Star Wars to a friend for the first time. Mm-hmm. And we watched the originals, and then we were watching the prequels. And then at a certain point, she was just like, oh, he's the man in the hood. He's the bad guy. And I was like, oh, right. That would be a twist, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so.
And I thought, okay, just a side tangent, but what if Palpatine was the apprentice and Maul was the master? Because the Sith thing that they do, right, is when the apprentice is ready, they kill the master and supplant them. That's the whole thing. It's what Kylo Ren does too in Episode 8. Just saying, what if, like, Palpatine is not as strong of a combatant? So he manipulated the situation so that Maul would be confronted by Jedi and die in combat. And then he ascends and is using the tools in his repertoire, politics and, maneuvering to gain his power.
Oh.
Like, without realizing it, we're watching a Sith apprentice fulfill his destiny.
Yeah.
Throughout the entire trilogy.
That's a neat idea. I like that. But yeah, I get your read on Plagueis too, because we know that Sith lie.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't they lie, and why wouldn't he manipulate him? So I buy that story.
And it tracks with when Anakin turns. He's like, just help me save Padme's life, and then Palpatine's kind of like, well, about that.
We can discover the secrets.
Like, oh. Well, and it then it doesn't align with his story if he was Plagueis' apprentice, right? Because Plagueis taught his apprentice everything he knew. So if the story was true, Palpatine knows how to do that shit.
Yeah, he would already know it.
Palpatine does not know how to do that.
Yeah.
And he had no intention of helping Anakin with this. Because Padme needs to die for Anakin to fully fall. So yeah, I don't think Plagueis ever existed. Now he does. I understand. There are books and shit about him. But I maintain in this movie, he's not real.
He should not have been real. One of the things too is the relationship between Anakin and Obi-Wan. If you don't watch the cartoon series, which you definitely should if you're a Star Wars fan, but if you don't watch the animated series, you're going to miss out on all the character development between them. Yes. All the relationship, everything about them, it's just not there. Especially since these characters keep getting separated. Our two main characters here, they're going on completely separate journeys and they come back together, which, is kind of the structure of Star Wars. We saw
it's the structure of Empire.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's one movie out of 3.
Yeah.
The other two, they're together pretty much the whole time.
Yeah, exactly. So like it can work, but like it shouldn't be all of those three movies. If Anakin and Obi-Wan could have been together and actually gone through some of those adventures together, it would have been more emotional when they have this climactic battle. It doesn't have the same impact when you tell the audience, oh yeah, we had this crazy encounter and then Gundark nest, you know, whatever, as opposed to showing that encounter to the audience. Like that's going to be far more impactful emotionally if you can show rather than tell, because they claim that they have this brother-like relationship, and Anakin's like, you're like a father like to me in episode 2, and it's like, yeah, you keep saying that, but I'm not seeing it, you know?
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I also think it's interesting that people made the criticism of the sequels about how the big three are never on screen together all that much, which is kind of true.
Yeah.
But I think it's actually a much bigger problem in this one than it is in that trilogy, because this trilogy, like, we need those relationships to form, and I think the sequels need that to a lesser degree, and we still get a lot of dynamic between them, but that's not the point of this. Yeah, I agree. The friendship is not really there, and the cartoon is great, and I push back on people who say the cartoon like redeems the prequels or something like that, because that's not how it works. They make the era more interesting and full, and the cartoon is great, and it does add a lot to these movies, but the movies are still what they are. They exist just as they always have, and now you just know some stuff that happens in between.
It doesn't redeem them, it just fills in the blanks a little bit more.
It makes watching them potentially more enjoyable, but also raises some eyebrows because it's not really congruous with how a lot of things are portrayed in the cartoon. Which is fine. They were made at different times for different audiences with different contexts. But I want to talk about the lightsaber fight to decide the fate of the whole universe, the biggest lightsaber fight that's ever happened ever, the Obi-Wan.
Lightsaber fight to end all lightsaber fights.
The Anakin Obi-Wan duel, another Red Letter Media reference and criticism I agree with here is that it goes on way too long, and it's really needlessly over the top. After the first couple of minutes, I'm over it.
Yeah, I get bored.
This fight lasts almost 12 minutes of screen time. From what I have been able to find, lightsaber duels in Star Wars tend to last between 1 and 3 minutes, which is a good amount of time.
Yes.
So, like, the Luke versus Vader duel, for example, in Return of the Jedi, it's cut in between a couple of different scenes, but it has 1 minute and 50 seconds of screen time, and that is perfectly adequate as the emotional climax for the entire trilogy. So why did this fight need to be so long? I don't know. Like, the most interesting parts of these fights are not the sword swinging, it's the character dynamics at play. And for the most part, this duel is just the two of them silently swinging around and throwing swords at each other in increasingly absurd conditions. Then there's the part where they spin their lightsabers super fast. I don't like that part, and I know the reason given for this, or at least given by fans, is that they know each other so well, they're so in tune with each other's movements that they just can't make a next move. Okay, but here's a cooler way to do that. Instead of having them spinning their swords and looking like complete fools, have them standing very still, eyeing each other, making very slight, subtle movements, and then a decisive move, each of them, and they're locked in, sort of like how samurai duels are often shot in movies, you know? Like, a lot of the samurai duels you see in these movies the fights themselves are very short, but the tension of the scene is the build-up. Who's going to strike? Where are they going to strike?
Sizing each other up.
Exactly.
Strategy. Well, I think Rebels, the Obi-Wan and Darth Maul duel, you know, that's a perfect example of how effective a lightsaber duel can be when there is like no action.
Yeah, and that is such a great example of a good lightsaber duel because the character dynamics there are king. Unless you're a super nerd and like are paying attention to the choreography or just like listening to things Dave Filoni says, you wouldn't pick up on that. But like the way that duel pans out, Obi-Wan starts in his prequel stance, then he shifts to his sequel era starting stance after he's already been like, hey man, we've been doing this for ages, just have some food. Like, and Maul says no. Like, Obi-Wan doesn't even fight him until he's like, oh, you're here for a reason, you're protecting someone. He's like, okay, gotta deal with this guy now. But Obi-Wan he switches stances, showing that like he's a different person now, he's matured. Yes. And then the fight is like 6 seconds long, right? And do you know all what happens?
I remember it vaguely, but yeah, I remember Maul tries to kind of do the move that he used on Qui-Gon.
Yes, he tries to do the same move, like punching him in the face with the hilt that he did to kill Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan's ready for it and dodges and does a different thing. That's how you do a lightsaber duel.
Yeah.
The restraint, I respect. It wasn't a big epic showdown. It was totally character motivated, and this fight is not.
Yeah.
There are some good moments in it, and it's unfortunately it's a very technically impressive sequence, but it keeps undercutting itself by emotionally overstaying its welcome. Like the beginning and ending are quite good too, except for the obviously silly "only a Sith deals in absolutes" line. It's an absolute. Maybe that's intentional hypocrisy on the part of Obi-Wan and the Jedi. I don't know. And here's another thing too on this. I think this trilogy overall should have been done differently and had Obi-Wan be front and center as the main character throughout. And why do I think this? So a big part of the story is how the Jedi Order, with all of its focus on detachment, ultimately failed to help Anakin, and he began to slip to the dark side as a result of that. Like when Anakin goes to Yoda for counseling when he's seeing Padme's visions, Yoda is just like, yeah, I mean, they might die, but you should just be happy about it. It's like, okay, man, that's obviously not what he needs here. Like, look at him.
He needs counseling.
He needs counseling. He needs help. On a micro level, we should see this failure personified in Obi-Wan. His teaching should fail Anakin in the same way that on a macro level, the Jedi Order is failing Anakin. I think that's a huge missed opportunity. And also it allows for Obi-Wan to kind of redeem himself as a teacher with Luke in the original trilogy.
Yeah, that would be a good way to do it.
But yeah, that's Revenge of the Sith. You got any closing thought?
I'll just say, yeah, I still like this movie the best out of the three, for sure. And I think that there's, some great moments in it. But yeah, it's still kind of plagued by the same problems as the other ones of just like the direction, the writing, the narrative structure, and just, some cinematography things.
Yeah, I agree. Like, people always say that it's the best of the three prequels and stuff like that, and it's like, sure, it's the most fun to watch, for sure, but I agree, it suffers from all of the same problems that the first two have. And it's in some cases to an even greater degree. It's like this and the prequels overall, like, enormous potential. I do not think any of them live up to it. I wish they did. I will always have a place in my heart for them because they're just something that I grew up with and do love, but they're, I don't think they don't work for me ultimately.
Lots of problems, but that's kind of on theme for Star Wars.
Yeah.
This stuff moving forward, except for the original trilogy, but that one had its issues too, but not as much as this one, I would say.
But yeah, well, we'll do more rewinds for sure, but next year on May the 4th, we will be doing the sequel trilogy, which I think will be very, very exciting. Once again, thank you to our friend Quincy Neal for the beautiful piece of artwork that you have seen throughout the video. And if you like what we're doing here, you can see more of us on this channel, Play, Pause, Rewind Videos, as well as our podcast's main channel, Play, Pause, Rewind. And we're on your podcast platforms wherever you go for that. And with that, happy Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you always.